I must say, I had a great nap earlier.
Naps are amazing.
They sure are. Sometimes you don't realize how bad you need one until after you've woken up from one, and how much better you feel.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Oh, they're playing TikTok ads on my channel now. See that?
Oh. Well, see, I pay for YouTube Premium Family or whatever.
Oh, yeah, so you don't even get the ads, right?
I don't.
Wow.
I know. I
I
know,
should probably do that, but
you probably should start a TikTok now that you have everything else.
Well, I do, actually, at this point. What do you say? We give it another couple minutes before we start?
Whatever you think works for me.
Okay, well, that's true. It's my show. I'm in charge here. Yeah, we are starting an hour earlier this week. So, I don't know that everybody got the message. But, anyway.
Uh-oh.
Well, I mean, I post these things on, all those same places I post them. I think this week I posted all the information on Wednesday, which is usually about what I do.
Yeah.
But, people are creatures of habit. People might stroll in at 6, and we're already an hour in, or something like that.
Well, the good thing is that with these, you can always go back and rewatch them anytime.
Yeah, that's true. They don't go away. We have all of our live shows from the last 3 years archived on the channel. Under the webinars playlist, there's a virtual tours playlist. And there's a bunch of other playlists in there as well related to live content. So if you haven't already checked that out, that would certainly be a good way for you to catch up on the shows that you haven't seen, or maybe you've only caught parts of them.
Or, if there's a show that we reference back to other shows. Which actually will might happen a couple times tonight. To say, hey, remember back on this show when I said this?
Well, that was especially significant for the shows we did in December. Because we kind of referenced those 3 shows, the Birmingham, Oklahoma City, and Syracuse shows were kind of grouped together in a way, and we were kind of cross-referencing those 3, as we were doing each one. So sometimes you will hear us make reference to shows that we've already done in the past, and so maybe it would be a good thing for you guys to catch up on what you missed so that you're not completely lost.
Or even just refresh yourself.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm going to at least, call back to a show that we did last year. Well, no. Yeah, last year. We're in 23 now.
Yeah, it is. It is 23 now. It's our first show of 2023.
If your memory's anything like mine.
Well, hi there, good evening, and welcome to another live edition here on Roadway Whiz Academy, I guess we'll call it. First show of 2023, and it's a big one. Atlanta, North Georgia.
ATL.
Yeah, I'm looking at the only panelist that we have tonight, other than me. It's Laura. So
Hi.
I'm sure you've heard her once or twice the last few weeks.
I'm going on a streak this season.
You are.
I've not missed an episode yet.
You're 6 for 6.
Yeah.
To this point, since early December. So Laura and I are going to walk everybody through Atlanta, Georgia, some of the history of the metro area. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot of roads. We're going to talk about some other things too, like civil rights movement stuff, urban planning stuff, the kind of stuff that we like to talk about when I have Laura on the show, and it's always great to have her. And so we'll be kind of talking about all of those things as they also relate to one another, because there are some things that we can talk about in that regard as well. All right, so the big thing that I started to announce this week over on my Facebook page is that I now have a Twitch channel and I have a Discord server. And at some point I will remember to post the links to those. Maybe I could do that in the live chat at some point. But there are links to both of these on my Facebook page if you've already been there. And I did post, I think I posted the link to the Twitch page on my community page on the YouTube channel. I don't think I got around to posting the Discord link yet, but both of those are up and running. If you haven't already checked those out, I certainly encourage you to follow me over on both of those sites, because I don't have enough sites already where people can follow me at.
Well, you don't have a TikTok, so
I do not have a TikTok
you're
yet.
missing out.
Yeah.
That's where all the cool kids are.
Yeah, all the kids, right?
All the kids. I know. Being 35, it clicked for me when I started seeing the fashions that I thought were cool as like a tween and a teen are now cool again.
Oh,
it's
really?
Like,
yeah.
Oh, I am old, aren't I?
Yeah, we are getting old, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
We graduated high school, 17 years ago, roughly?
Graduated in 2005, so it'll be 18 years.
It'll be 18 in the
June.
spring.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's half a lifetime ago. How about that?
I know. Actually, what's bizarre to me to think about is that, a girl that in my class who was pregnant senior year, this year her daughter is a senior.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah, that's wacky, isn't it?
Yeah.
What am I doing on the YouTube channel? I'm continuing with Oklahoma uploads. I'm starting to make my way through the Oklahoma turnpikes. I think I did the Cherokee Turnpike for a couple of days, and I'm working my way around eastern Oklahoma doing the other ones as well. I think I did the Creek Turnpike this week. And most of the other turnpikes will be up on the channel in the next couple of weeks, I think. So that's what's coming up on the channel as far as uploads are concerned. What's coming up for us here is a discussion about Atlanta. So we have some metrics on the screen here. Atlanta proper is about 500,000 people. The metro is top 10 in the U.S. for population of over 6 million. The story of Atlanta really begins in 1836 when the Georgia General Assembly agreed to build a railroad link between Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the Atlantic coast near Savannah. They looked into a number of different possible alignments for this thing and decided to drive their first stake at a place called Five Points, which is now actually on Foundry Street in downtown Atlanta. It was around this point that a railroad station was built, and there was a trading post, and a settlement eventually popped up around this. The settlement itself eventually became known as Atlanta, probably a reference to the name of the railroad that was built here, the Western and Atlantic Railroad. So this settlement was incorporated as Atlanta in 1847. It became a pretty significant crossroads community by the time the Civil War happened. The railroads of the South all seemed to kind of converge in northern Georgia, and Atlanta became a major transportation hub, as well as a major hub for the manufacturing of armaments for the Confederate Army, which made Atlanta a very significant target for the Union Army. And I will finish that story as we go through tonight's presentation. So just keep that in mind. Atlanta has many nicknames. One of them that you may not be too familiar with is Cradle of the Civil Rights Movement. Laura will tell us more about that in a moment. Atlanta was the host city of the 1996 Summer Olympics, the games of the 26th Olympiad, um, marking the 100th anniversary of the first modern Olympiad, which was held in 1896 in Athens, Greece. Um, Atlanta was also known for a long time as the capital of the South. I don't think you really see that nickname so much anymore, but it kind of was a reference to, its traditional Southern values and history and heritage and that kind of thing. But over the course of about 150 years, we'll see that Atlanta has gone from being, the capital of the South to a world-class, worldwide metropolis. And we'll kind of talk about all those things as they pertain to roads as well. But I was mentioning the whole idea of cradle of the civil rights movement, and Laura is here to tell us more about that.
Yeah, so basically from 1940 to 1970, the city became the epicenter for the movement as black leaders fought for voting rights, access to public facilities and institutions, and economic and educational opportunities for African Americans. Local figures like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., former Congressman, Ambassador, and Mayor Andrew Young, and Congressman John Lewis rose to national and international prominence through their contribution to the nonviolent struggle for equal rights. Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta in 1929, and his birthplace is now a national historical park. He and his wife are also buried there. Basically, he and Ralph David Abernathy formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in Atlanta in 1957 to coordinate protest activities across the South. And they trained communities in the philosophy of nonviolent civil disobedience, and they organized voter registration drives. And the SCLC's work was instrumental in the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And I talk about the SCLS a lot more back in the Selma to Montgomery episode. Also, I'd recommend looking back at the Birmingham episode for some more civil rights history. While the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968 dampened spirits, the election of Maynard Jackson as vice mayor of Atlanta in 1969 bolstered spirits, and then eventually prepared his way to be elected as mayor of Atlanta and to be the first black mayor in the Deep South in 1973. And that's a big deal. Same year is when Andrew Young was elected as the first African American congressman from Georgia since Reconstruction. And these sorts of things are very important because, as we'll talk about later with highway revolts, talking about Atlanta as the cradle of the civil rights movement, these leaders going into the 1970s into the 1980s influenced certain highways and whether or not they got built or if they got built differently. Other prominent groups are the organizations and businesses of the Sweet Auburn Avenue District, and that's in East Atlanta. And then in West Atlanta, you have the historically black colleges and universities, Morehouse College, Spelman College, and Clark Atlanta University. So just to make a brief reference to the photos really fast, top right, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s house, the mural that you see of Congressman John Lewis, that is in the Sweet Auburn District. And in the lower picture are students from the HBCU's protest march. But as we think of civil rights, we think very much about post-World War II, but civil rights in general began much earlier than that. Dan's going to talk more about the Civil War. After the Civil War, you had Reconstruction, which was the period to, deal with the inequities of slavery and solve the problems of readmitting the 11 states back into the Union. Reconstruction ended with the Compromise of 1877, basically to settle the 1876 presidential election. The idea was that, they'd let Rutherford B. Hayes win if the federal government ended Reconstruction. They promised, we'll protect the civil political rights in the South. It'll be fine. We can manage ourselves. We don't need federal oversight. And no.
Yeah, you know how that goes. Yeah.
Yeah, and so obviously they lied. So in Atlanta, in the period from 1880 to 1910, you had the start of direct action strikes and boycotts. The first one being the 1881 washerwoman strike. And you also had streetcar strikes from 1892 to 1906. So we think about, bus boycotts and, Rosa Parks. But these sort of things started in the streetcar era in Atlanta. And you had demonstrations against lynching at this time, too. We talked previously in the Tulsa episode about the race riot that happened there. There was, unfortunately, an Atlanta race riot in 1906. And that was came about because of the resentment of black self-determination, because basically, the black African-American community was being pretty successful in building their own, enterprises, social and civic organizations, churches, universities. And unfortunately 40 people were killed, and there were mobs of up to 10,000 people. After that, basically, was black and white leaders kind of got together and did what was called the Atlanta Way. They tried to negotiate and keep peace. And, black leaders hoped that by doing this, that they would be given more resources for black self-help efforts. And unfortunately, that was met with limited success. The top photo is of the 1881 washerwoman strike. The bottom photo is actually later, but it kind of captures, you see the marquee with Cary Grant, movies.
No, it is him there, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
But I think it captures very much why the civil rights movement, had to be reignited in the 1940s to 1970s.
Yeah.
Atlanta's image is a fraud. It looked like there was peace, and Atlanta was, we have these agreements to have peace and equality, and that's not really how it happened. But I thought it was important to kind of give this background of, especially because these things do affect, ultimately, some of the highways that did not get built.
Well, they affect planning decisions on
Yes.
the whole, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
So from civil rights, I'm obligated to talk for a moment about professional sports in Atlanta. We can talk about a few different things here. Atlanta United, you see on your screen, they are the MLS franchise. They were founded in 2017. They made history as winning the MLS Cup in just their second season of existence in 2018. Which was the first major sports championship in Atlanta since the Atlanta Braves won the World Series in 1995. The Atlanta Hawks are the NBA representative. They have never won a championship during their play in Atlanta, which dates back to 1968. However, their roots as an organization go back as far as 1946, when they were founded as the Buffalo Bisons. They moved a few times in there before settling in Atlanta in 1968, most notably to St. Louis when they won their lone NBA championship as the St. Louis Hawks. NASCAR is really popular in Georgia. This will not be the last time I say that, probably tonight. Atlanta Motor Speedway is a big hub of activity on the calendar, located in Hampton, which is about 45 minutes south of the perimeter off of I-75. The Braves are the MLB team, and they go back to the early, I think as far back as the 1870s is when an organized team in Boston really started. that eventually became known as the Braves. So they had a few different names there in the 1800s, but they settled on the Braves name in the early 1900s. They left for Milwaukee at the end of the 1952 season. Their stay in Milwaukee was relatively short before they moved to Atlanta for the 1966 season, which is where they reside today. Interestingly, the Braves have won 4 world championships. Their new stadium opened up out in the suburbs, out in Marietta in 2017. They've won 4 championships, one in arguably a different city. They won one championship in 1914 as the Boston Braves. They won the 1957 World Series in Milwaukee. They won 1995 in Atlanta. And they won in 2021 with their stadium out in Cobb County. And then we have the Falcons over here. We don't want to forget about them. They are They were founded in the same year as the Braves in 1966. They are a 2-time Super Bowl participant, first in 1998, I think, when Super Bowl 33 happened, and it didn't go so well for them. But this one, Super Bowl 51, definitely went a lot better for them. As you see, they are well on their way to a victory there in Super Bowl 51, so... Oh, wait, what's that? Oh, I'm being told that I have another slide here. Oh, god damn it. Yeah. So the Falcons are probably going to be known, unfortunately, for one of the biggest collapses in Super Bowl history. At the hands of everyone's favorite quarterback, Tom Brady, of course. It's really... The thing about that night was that I was checking Facebook the whole night, and all the people who have ties to Atlanta were beside themselves the first 3 quarters of the game, and then they were really beside themselves, after, the end of the game. It's just amazing how things just turn on a dime sometimes.
It makes me think of the second Super Bowl that the Ravens were in, where...
Yeah, that very nearly went the same way, right? Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I think the Niners had 4th and goal in that, and they were going in for the winning score, didn't they? Or something like that, right?
Something like that. I mean, it was a nail biter. I don't think I had any nails left the second half. We went from, this is an obvious victory, to, oh my God, I don't know if we're going to win.
I know,
And then we pulled it through the last minute, but that was terrifying.
I know, that was a close one. Yeah. Absolutely. All right, Atlanta is one city. Well, one thing we haven't talked about as far as sports is concerned is hockey. Atlanta's got quite an interesting history with hockey. They've had 2 cracks at the NHL. Both have not gone very well. The first iteration was the Atlanta Flames, which were an expansion team in 1972. They only lasted about 8 seasons before they relocated north to Calgary, where they are now the Calgary Flames. The name Atlanta Flames supposedly is a tribute to the burning of Atlanta by the U.S. Army in 1864, which, they said that the turnout for the Flames wasn't very good. And gee, you know what? I wouldn't expect it to be very good if that was the root of their name. Like, who the hell wants to be reminded of that? That didn't seem like a very smart decision, but I don't know. But anyway, so that was the Flames story. And then 19 years after the Flames left Atlanta, the city got another shot in 1999 with the Atlanta Thrashers. The Thrashers name makes a lot more sense because it's derived from the brown thrasher, which is the Georgia state bird. It's also an early reference to Atlanta's early name as a settlement of Thrasherville. They only made it 12 years before they also went north of the border. They are now the second iteration of the Winnipeg Jets. They only made the playoffs once. I think they won the division once, but I don't think they ever won a playoff game as a franchise. So Atlanta's 0-2, and it's very unlikely that they're going to get another crack at it anytime soon.
The Olympics!
The Olympics are a big story in Atlanta, even today. As I mentioned, they were the host of the Summer Games in 1996. And this is Centennial Park in downtown Atlanta, which is a reference to the centennial of the original modern Olympiad in 1896. There were events held all throughout North Georgia, all the way up into the far northeast part of the state for some of the more mountainous events. I think they even had some events out in northern Alabama, if I'm not mistaken. But you still see a lot of Olympic-themed stuff here. The original site of the torch is still in place, just south of the state capitol building. Also, something else that I really find interesting is the outline of the original Fulton County Stadium, which was built in 1966 to accommodate the Atlanta Braves and Falcons. So it was a dual-purpose stadium, like a very cookie-cutter facility that was very common in those days, the 1960s, 70s, that period. The stadium was demolished at the end of the 1996 season. The outline of it still remains, and it's now largely used as a parking lot for Georgia State University campus apartments, I believe. But this is also the location where Hank Aaron hit his 715th career home run in April 1974, surpassing Babe Ruth's career total. And I think it's pretty cool that they kept the portion of the fence where the ball landed there, beyond the fence.
That is really cool.
Yeah, it is kind of neat. And of course, the outline of the base paths is still preserved in the parking lot, so you can go and check that out if you'd like. What we're looking at is, I don't even remember what the name of the stadium is, but it was built as the main Olympic stadium in 1996. It was renovated following the Olympic Games to become Turner Field, which was the home of the Atlanta Braves from 1997 to 2016. It's now the home of Georgia State University Athletics. And there still are some references to the Braves in South Atlanta, like this mural here for Hank Aaron, right across from Turner Field. Now, the Braves moved out to Cobb County in 2017, and they basically built their own entertainment district. It's not just the ballpark. There's also hotels and restaurants and all that stuff. It's located right where the perimeter meets I-75, northwest of the city limit. I have not taken in a game there, but I hear it's a pretty nice venue with great sightlines. My uncle went to a World Series game back in 2021, and he really enjoyed it.
Cool.
So, I mean, they only live about 10 minutes from the ballpark, so
nice.
It's easy enough for them to get to.
Yes.
And then we have the Falcons, who play in one of the most amazing NFL venues out there right now. It's right up there with Dallas and Los Angeles and maybe a couple of others on the short list. But Mercedes-Benz Stadium is now, it's not only the home of the Falcons, it's where Atlanta United plays their home games. It is also the home of the SEC championship game. It also hosts New Year's related college bowl games as well. And it does have a retractable, opening in the center that kind of folds outward. So it's a little bit of a unique building as far as the roof design is concerned. And then Atlanta's got some gorgeous, places where you can see the skyline. This picture was from 400 feet above my aunt and uncle's house northwest of town. So you see you have two different skylines here. Like on the right is the main midtown and downtown skyline, and on the left is the Buckhead section of Atlanta, which is kind of its own. It's a part of Fulton County. It's a part of the Atlanta fabric, but it's kind of developed off. It's kind of an offshoot in a sense. It's kind of like its own edge city within the city of Atlanta. There's a lot happening there, as we'll talk about in a little bit. But some of these views, like this is from the area above Georgia Tech. There's some great cityscape shots that you can have. If you're into aerial photography, this is a place that you really got to spend some time in at some point.
These shots are amazing.
Aren't these cool?
So cool.
I don't like to compliment my work too often, but I'd say I didn't do too bad.
I think you did a great job. I will compliment you.
Why, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to throw out there, before we move on, the Atlanta Olympics, I was 9 years old that summer. It's actually the first Summer Olympics that I remember.
Hmm.
And I remember watching so much of it. And I remember everything being such a huge deal,
Mm-hmm.
and everything, being Olympic themed. And I remember having like an Olympic Barbie.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And I've always wanted to go to Atlanta since then,
Hmm.
just because of seeing all the coverage, and just always thought it was a really cool city.
It was a lot of people's first impressions of Atlanta, right?
Yeah.
It really put Atlanta on the map globally, I think.
Yeah.
Atlanta really became a world-class city after that.
Can we go back to the
Yeah.
previous slide for a second?
Which one?
This one.
This one.
I think it's good to point out the routes before we talk about them.
Okay.
The major, you got 75 going through, I-75 going through the city.
Yeah, kind of going out like that.
Then you got 85.
85 comes in from the northeast.
Yeah.
And then goes out to the southwest.
And then east-west you have I-20.
Yeah, that's here.
The Beltway is I-285.
That's that.
And then you got I-675 in the south.
Yeah, you've got a few other ones here.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
And 575 in the north. And then, of course, U.S. highways.
U.S. highways are always a good thing to talk about, yep.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the lay of the land here as we dive in. Well, any discussion about Atlanta freeways, I think, should start with a discussion about the downtown connector, which includes parts of Interstates 75 and 85 running right through downtown Atlanta. The story of this highway really begins with the initial study into Georgia and Atlanta-specific expressways, which was conducted in the 1940s, 1944, I believe. The state of Georgia, the Georgia Highway Department, the city of Atlanta, they all collaborated on a plan to build a series of expressways to serve, downtown Atlanta and its immediate suburbs, under the assumption that these highways would eventually be included into what was then rumored to be an interstate highway system that was in the works. Of course, this would take shape in 1956 under the Federal Aid Highway Act. But they were starting to talk about some sort of national, freeway network even back in the 1940s, which this was postponed until after World War II. But they had a pretty good idea of what they wanted to do with the downtown connector, and construction on it actually began as far back as 1948. It was a very lengthy process. The highway didn't actually get completed until 1964. But one of the things that made it take so long was that they were trying to figure out an alignment for it. And if I go back to this slide, here you have a couple of different iterations of what they were thinking. I believe this one on the left is from the 1940s. And you can see how there are different radiating highways that are converging right here in downtown. And then by the mid-1950s, the plan had changed somewhat, and then it had expanded to enable the creation of a highway around encircling Metro Atlanta as well. So these two plans sort of formed the basis for the Atlanta freeway system. And it was off of these plans that they built the downtown connector, which they kind of figured all along was going to be the central piece of the whole system. The downtown connector was built over the course of almost 15 years, and it was built at quite a price. The demolition of neighborhoods that were well established, both in Midtown and in downtown near the state capitol. Most notably, perhaps, is the severing of the Sweet Auburn neighborhood. Near the state capitol. Yeah, I think you have more on that, right?
Well, basically,
Yeah.
I mean, really, the key thing there is that that was the core of this. That is like the core neighborhood of the civil rights movement, and it was divided in two.
Yeah.
With this highway,
Mm-hmm.
and these things are not accidental. You think about the timeline. That it was very intentional to put the highway through that neighborhood.
Yeah, so if you think about the timeline, this highway is starting to see construction right as the civil rights movement is gaining steam.
Yeah.
So it's right, it's right around that point, and Sweet Auburn was becoming a a hub of activity for the movement. And so you had this notion at the planning level in Atlanta that, we need to keep, downtown separate from these folks. That was kind of part of the mentality that was going on there. And so that's kind of why they did what they did, and it's why this freeway kind of takes the weird curve that it takes.
Yep.
As you're going kind of, as we saw on the map, it goes north to south, but then it kind of takes a weird bulge in its alignment out to the east. Well, that was, to the intent there, the unwritten intent there was to wall off Sweet Auburn from downtown.
Yeah.
And so that's what ended up happening. So as we look through some other pictures here, it's interesting that I think we should probably talk at this point we should skip ahead about 30 years to about the 1980s, because in the aftermath of what we're going to talk about later in the form of the freeway revolts in Atlanta, they had to come up with a way to address the traffic situation in the city. And so Georgia DOT developed a program called Freeing the Freeways, which was developed in the 80s. It was a program that took about 20 years to implement. And it saw the doubling of the total lane mileage in Atlanta Metro for its freeways. It's hard to believe when you look at pictures like this, but the downtown connector was only built with 3 lanes per direction originally in the 1950s and 60s.
Wow.
The freeway's size was basically more than doubled under this program in the 1980s and 90s. It also saw the introduction of HOV lanes. It saw the reorganizing of exit and entrance locations. It is still one of the most congested freeways in America, even with all of this work. But it's, imagine what it would have been like if they had not done any of this work either. The congestion sort of came anyway, whether they were going to work on, improving these highways or not. So under the Freeing the Freeways program, all of the interstate freeways in Atlanta were worked on. So the perimeter saw a lot of improvements, and the downtown connector was the last of the highways to receive a bunch of improvements. But this was only after all the freeways outside the city had been improved. They actually kind of knew what they were doing in staging this, because they wanted to make sure that the bypass routes were done first so that they could divert traffic away from the city center, because they knew that the downtown work was going to be the most disruptive. So Georgia DOT implemented this program in the 1980s, and I believe it was wrapped up in time for the Atlanta Olympics in 1996. And that's the form that this highway takes today.
Wow.
It is a giant sea of asphalt and cars.
Yes.
It's really, there aren't that many highways in America that are this wide that are placed in such an urban spot as this.
It left a huge mark on me when we passed through when I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
We took I-85 from Maryland. Well, obviously I-85 starts in Virginia, but traveling from Maryland to Alabama, we eventually ended up on I-85, and we did pass through Atlanta, and it blew my mind how wide the highway was and how fast people were driving on it.
Well, if you catch it at the right time, it's nice and wide open.
Yeah.
I mean, not when I took this picture, obviously.
Well,
but,
right.
but yeah, it's certainly an interesting road to drive. I won't argue with that. I do want to mention one other thing here. Recent discussions, I'll go back to this slide. Recent discussions have involved, what to do about some of the space above the freeway. Because as you see, there's this giant trench with 10 to 12 lanes of traffic in it, and Atlanta officials are kind of thinking about what they can do about, making the area a little bit more attractive for, visitors and commuters and whatnot. So there was a plan put forth in 2016 known as the Stitch, and this would have basically built a cover over a section of the highway in Midtown and downtown Atlanta, which would have covered an area of about 14 acres. A subsequent study in 2019 that was released estimated that this project would take about 10 years to complete and would cost at least $450 million to build. The city of Atlanta has not made a decision on what they want to do as far as this is concerned, but it is something that they are considering. And a lot of cities are looking into solutions like this. It's not just Atlanta. A lot of cities are looking into ways to put their freeways out of sight. Especially in cities where you have major highways that can't really be moved, but you can put a lid on top of them, and you can put green space on top of them, and you can make the area a little bit more attractive in that regard. And I say, go for it.
Well, I think too the other big thing is that the Stitch is trying to restitch some of these neighborhoods together. And try and, undo, basically 60 years of injustice, particularly to black neighborhoods. At the end of October of this past year, 2022, the Stitch actually secured $1.16 million in federal funding, thanks to a community project funding request made by U.S. Rep. Nakima Williams. But yes, that's her quote, that the project would undo 60 years of injustice. And so I hope that it will continue to move forward. Because as I've mentioned in previous episodes this season, that, from a psychological and sociological standpoint, that it's good to be able to try to, stitch together these neighborhoods again and to create a cohesive cityscape and to try and undo the injustice.
Well, the other thing is if this project gets off the ground and is successful, there are other areas that they could certainly look into covering.
Yes.
Especially up in Midtown in the area around Georgia Tech. I know that the people up that way are very interested to see how this project, which is further south along the line, they're interested to see how that goes. Because they could certainly put a lid over it, at Georgia Tech and make that area sparkle, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
So stay tuned on that. All right, Atlanta has a highway that encircles the metro, but a little bit of a word of advice: don't go to Atlanta and call it the Beltway, because people won't know what you're talking about. In Atlanta, they call it the Perimeter. The Perimeter has its roots in the 1950s as they were planning the construction of highways such as the Downtown Connector and these other highways, and they saw the Perimeter as sort of the bypass around all of the metro area. I mean, it was a nice idea, but when suburban sprawl happened in the 60s and the 70s, all the communities really moved out to the Perimeter, and we were left with a highway that is one of the busiest highways in America by usage on a daily basis. I believe the number is about 2 million people a day use a section of the Perimeter and over a 24-hour period. So it makes it one of the busiest interstates, not just in the Atlanta metro, but also in the entire country. A couple of things that I want to mention here. Well, the one thing that I think is really cool is that in 2006, where is it here? Yeah, 2006, Atlanta's airport expanded. They built a new runway 1028. So this was the fifth runway. And it was built above the freeway. So as you see here on this picture on the lower right, the project cost $1.3 billion to build this 9,000-foot long runway. It's one of the only active runways above a freeway in the United States. One of the more famous earlier examples of this was at the old Stapleton Airport in Denver, before the airport moved way out east of the city. There were active runways above I-70 at Stapleton. That was one of the more famous examples of that. But so this runway and taxiway here is active. I have never actually seen a plane land or take off from it, but supposedly that does happen from time to time. Congestion on the Perimeter is as I said, a common occurrence. There are plans in the works for a new express toll lane system for, I'd say, the northern half of the perimeter, north of I-20. That is a very long-term project that is not expected to get going, I think, for another few years or so. But that is something to keep an eye out on the horizon. Another thing I'd like to mention is that because there are bans on through trucks through downtown Atlanta on the connector and on I-20, this creates another problem in that all truck through traffic in Atlanta has to go around on the perimeter, which just adds more volume to a highway that is already overtaxed. I think I read somewhere not too long ago that somebody was thinking about putting or proposing, like, well, I'll put it to you this way. If they were going to do this correctly, they would have a set of lanes for cars. You would have a set of lanes for trucks only, so kind of like your New Jersey Turnpike setup. And then you probably would also need to have devoted lanes for high occupancy toll as well. That's if you were going to do it right, and even then I don't think it would be enough. But that's kind of the scale of what the improvements that would be necessary here. I'm not advocating for the removal of the truck ban by any stretch, but if you're going to do something like that, you also need to account for the other parts of the system that are going to be stressed as a result of doing something like that. And I don't know that anything like that is necessarily on the horizon. But that's what we got. 85 north of town. So leading up towards upstate South Carolina. This section of highway is interesting because it had the first high occupancy toll lanes in the state of Georgia. The original HOV lanes, which were built in the 80s as part of the Freeing the Freeways program, were converted for HOT use in 2011. Following the success of that program, Georgia DOT built an extension of those toll lanes out towards I-985 in Gainesville, which was completed in 2019. This section of highway is also probably most famous nationally for what folks in Atlanta called Carmageddon, which happened in March of 2017 when there was a fire that was started underneath the highway. And it started at a Georgia DOT maintenance facility where they were storing flammable, high-density polyethylene and fiberglass tubing or something like that. The fire resulted in the destruction of the elevated highway in Midtown Atlanta, which required the demolition of the existing highway and the reconstruction. Obviously, both directions of the highway were closed. And so Georgia's governor declared a state of emergency. The highway was rebuilt over the course of about 2 months, which was well ahead of schedule, but still, it was a traffic nightmare. And people in Atlanta still talk about that, even today, more than 5 years later. They still refer to it as Carmageddon. It's one of those things that, obviously, Atlanta traffic is bad enough, but it's certainly something like this where it becomes monumental is something that I don't think anybody in Atlanta will ever forget. So when 85 was built, leading northeasterly from Atlanta, it was not built on the alignment that we see today. It was built along this alignment instead, what's known as the Buford Street Connector, which was the original path of 85 leading northeast from Midtown. Laura, what do you got on the Buford Street alignment?
Yeah, I mean, it like you said, it's just sort of, the Buford Highway originated as a nondescript state roadway connecting Atlanta and points northeast, including the railroad towns of Chamblee and Doraville, as well as points further north. Doraville and Chamblee and Norcross had long been home to blue-collar, largely white, lower middle-class population. they saw increasing immigrant population in the 1960s and 70s due to sprawling development, strip mall development, apartment complexes, more affordable housing, and the area actually attracted many Latino workers during the construction boom that preceded the 1996 Olympic Games. And during the Olympics, Chambly embraced the growing international character of Buford Highway, while more conservative Doraville resisted it. In fact, the mayor even said, "Why would we want to attract more immigrants when we've got all we want?"
Yeah, I think that area of the metro, up in Gwinnett County especially, has always been more conservative, relative to most of the other Atlanta counties. Yeah, so Fulton County is where Atlanta proper is, and then you have other suburban counties like DeKalb County out east and Clayton County to the south. Those counties have become more moderate as far as political leanings and whatnot. But other counties such as Cobb and Gwinnett have retained a lot of their old-fashioned conservatism towards planning and stuff like that. So in a way, it's not surprising that you would still have a lot of resistance up that way.
Yeah, and it's just interesting because it's a different type of racial tension connected to a road compared to most of the other ones that we have and will talk about.
Sure, yeah.
This one is much more anti-immigrant as opposed to anti-black. So.
Yeah. We could talk about I-75, which in the north of the metro runs from downtown up towards Cobb County and up towards, eventually connects you up with eastern Tennessee and Chattanooga. The most significant project here in recent years was the project known as the Northwest Corridor Express Lanes Project, which was carried out from 2014 to 2018. The $834 million project was highlighted by the creation of a separate, mostly elevated reversible roadway, which has been known rather fondly in the roads community as the Toller Coaster, because it is an express toll facility.
The Toller Coaster!
It's an interesting drive. I know that a lot of people really think it's the greatest thing of all time. I wouldn't go that far, but it's an interesting experience if you ever have the chance to drive it. It really was a result of them knowing that they wanted to build a reversible highway. They didn't want to build toll lanes, for both directions of the freeway. And this was in part due to limited space to work with. So you'll find that this reversible elevated highway kind of meanders its way between the median of the highway, and then it kind of goes off to one side, and then it goes back into the median. It kind of goes like this a little bit. It kind of winds its way up and down and side to side, which obviously is how it gets its nickname. But it also makes for a very interesting drive, because it can be a little disorienting when you're driving, let's say, northbound, and the southbound I-75 main line is on your right as you're as you're making your way north, and it's like, wait a minute, this doesn't look right. But so it's an interesting experience, and if you're into that kind of thing, it certainly is something that you should experience at least once. I would like to now finish the story that I started at the opening of this show. As I said, Atlanta was a major hub in the railroad industry in the early 1860s, and this made it a very important commodity for the Confederate States in the Civil War, and the Union Army recognized this as well. And the man for the job to lead the Union campaign against Atlanta was William Tecumseh Sherman, whose army set out from Chattanooga in early 1864 on the Atlanta campaign, which lasted from May through September of that year. It culminated on September 2nd, 1864, when Atlanta surrendered to the Union Army. But in the months leading up to that point, there are several different battle sites from this campaign that are still relatively preserved to this day. So if you're into the Civil War and all of that stuff, this is a corridor that might interest you. Battle sites such as Resaca, New Hope Church, and perhaps the most famous of these is Kennesaw Mountain, which was the lone Union Army defeat of that campaign. But nevertheless, the Union regrouped after that and continued their advance on Atlanta, and eventually they encircled the city. A common thing that is said about this whole episode is that Sherman ordered the destruction of Atlanta, which is not entirely true. Actually, the Confederate forces that were abandoning the city ordered the destruction of a lot of the military-related equipment in Atlanta. And then Sherman came in after the city had mostly been wrecked already and ordered all the citizens in Atlanta to evacuate anyway. So they both kind of had a role to play in the destruction of the city that I think has culturally been entirely appropriated to the Union Army, but that's not entirely correct. As an appendix to the story, the chapter that followed, the March to the Sea, as it was called, from September to December of 1864, yeah, that was all the Union that did that. So I'm not going to dispute that claim. But, that was the famous, Making Georgia Howl campaign of late 1864, which culminated in the capture of the city of Savannah. It was really General Sherman's crowning achievement in the Civil War. But yeah, as I said, this whole Chattanooga to Atlanta stretch along I-75 is littered with Civil War history, and is something that, as a person who is interested in the Civil War like myself, it's a really interesting spot to visit. 85 south of Atlanta. Not a whole lot to say about this stretch. This is the highway that you would take to reach the domestic terminals at Atlanta Airport. Quintessential Georgian freeway. And I say that because once you get outside the city, towards Alabama, the tree-lined, shoulders and the trees in the median at times, that's your typical rural Georgian feel. And it's represented, in full on this freeway in particular. As you get out towards Alabama, you have the Kia plant outside Columbus.
Oh.
Kia Boulevard, isn't that neat?
I wonder if that's where our Kia, mine and Mike's Kia Soul, was manufactured.
It might have been.
Could have been.
Yeah. How old's your car?
2017.
Maybe. 75, on the other hand, south of Atlanta, is much more interesting. This highway serves a very important suburban corridor. The area of the suburbs around, say, the communities of McDonough and Hampton. And as I mentioned, Atlanta Motor Speedway is in this area. So on race weekends, this area gets a lot of traffic as well. Some of this was addressed in a project known as the South Metro Express Lanes Project, which was built between 2014 and 2017 at a cost of $226 million. Like the Northwest Corridor project that we talked about already, this project also involved the creation of reversible express toll lanes. However, these lanes are not nearly as interesting as the ones in the Northwest, but they still are there and they still serve a pretty important purpose. Here they are on this slide here. So long-term plans call for an extension of these express lanes to the north to tie in with the existing HOV lanes on 75 across from Atlanta Airport, south of the downtown connector. And while we're on the subject of long-term plans, I kind of made reference to some of these projects already, but I will do so. This is kind of a good graphic to summarize what exists and what is on the planning board right now and kind of what's on the long-term wish list. So the lines that you see in purple here are the existing toll express lanes network. So what we just talked about with I-75 is down here in the South Metro. the Northwest Corridor is up here, for instance, and then the 85 Express and the 85 Extension are up in this area. What you see in green, these are projects that are being designed and proposed at this time. So I did make mention of the express lane setup that they want to put on the perimeter in the north of town. So that's highlighted in green. And then the long-term wish list is in yellow. So you have, a connection for the south metro lanes to the perimeter. You have express lanes possibly for I-20 outside the perimeter as well. So that's kind of what Georgia's looking at in the next decade or two as far as ways to expand the toll lanes system. Notice how there's nothing really on the docket for inside the perimeter. I suspect that's largely because at this point in the aftermath of the Freeing the Freeways program, they kind of maxed out all the space that they could use. And we certainly saw that with the downtown connector and the expansion of that in the 80s and 90s. So they don't really have a whole lot of new space to work with as far as the freeways in the city of Atlanta itself. But at least they can kind of work their way into some solutions, outside the city itself. All right, we have one more mainline freeway to talk about, and that is I-20, which is the lone east-west interstate. Interesting to talk about this one because, there's a lot of racial history involving this highway. First of all, with its name, honoring Ralph David Abernathy, but also its alignment across Atlanta was largely determined by this concept that we talked about earlier of walling off parts of the city from minority communities and stuff like that. Most notably, the corridor in West Atlanta for I-20 was developed in the late 1950s. In the words of then Mayor Bill Hartsfield, as a boundary between the white and Negro communities on the west side of town, and that's kind of how they intended this corridor to be seen as.
It was intended to be built as a wall.
Yeah.
And, I mentioned earlier about this. Atlanta had this idea that, if they built these walls and maintain segregation, that it would articulate this civic vision of racial peace and economic progress. And in fact, Mayor Hartsfield bragged that Atlanta was the, quote, city too busy to hate.
Yeah.
So, and going back to that picture, I just think encapsulated perfectly. Atlanta is a fraud.
Well, that's kind of what they're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That it's, no, it was all about segregation and in deliberately plotting this route as a winding route. In a way to separate and just cause destruction in neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. But what's interesting, right, is the story that happens after that is that you have these interstates. After so-called urban renewal and the new interstates, it helps speed white flight from Atlanta.
Well, that's the other thing that happens. Yeah.
So over the 1960s. Roughly 60,000 white residents leave the city, and with many of them relocating in the suburbs along the northern rim. So it actually, and then another 100,000 in the 1970s. So suddenly it went from being the, quote, city too busy to hate to the, quote, city too busy moving to hate.
Yeah. So much of the population left Metro Atlanta for what you called the northern suburbs, which that's important because eventually when we talk about MARTA, we're talking about the Cobb County and Gwinnett County in particular. That's where they ended up, and we'll talk more about those counties and how they fit into the transit network. And I'm sure you will find at the end that it's not a coincidence that certain things happen the way that they did up in those counties. But yeah, so that's kind of the other thing that happens when you build freeways in urban areas is that it makes it easier to get into town, but it also makes it easier to get out of town.
Yeah, and I talked a little bit about Ralph David Abernathy Sr. earlier, but just to reiterate, he co-created and was an executive board member of the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He became the president following the assassination of King in 1968, where he then led the Poor People's Campaign in Washington, D.C. He also served on many marches and demonstrations, and as an advisory committee member of the Congress on Racial Equality, which is CORE. But yeah, he also one other important note, he collaborated with King and E.D. Nixon to create the Montgomery Improvement Association, which led to the Montgomery bus boycott.
Yeah, he did, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one of my favorite movies of all time is Smokey and the Bandit. I'm sure you've seen that movie, right?
Yep.
Did you know that parts of that movie were filmed along the 400?
Oh, I did not.
So, the 400 actually has its roots in the 1950s as part of that original master plan for Atlanta Freeways. It was originally labeled as the North Fulton Expressway. This project was eventually built out in the 1970s and was eventually extended north to the location it is today by the early 80s. Smokey and the Bandit was released in 1977, and if you're not familiar with that movie, let's just say it involves a lot of car/police chases on highways. I think that's a good way to summarize it.
Yep.
And so they used part of the recently opened 400 to film parts of that movie, and I didn't realize, you wouldn't have known that it was on the 400 because in the early 70s, the section of this highway up by, Cumming and Alpharetta, it was open country. There was no development up that way. So it looked, in the 1970s when that was filmed, it looked just like a country, freeway or whatever.
Yeah.
It was basically unrecognizable. But, so they did film parts of that highway, parts of the movie up on that highway. Back when there was nobody using it. It was easy. It was easier to shut it down when there was nobody up there.
Yeah.
So that's the story north of the perimeter. Now, south of the perimeter is a whole other story. It was proposed to extend all the way down into Midtown Atlanta, but this was largely stopped for quite a while because of the Atlanta Freeway revolts. It never saw the light of day until the 1990s, in fact. There was a lot of discussion about what form this highway would take, what size would it be. Eventually they reached a compromise where they would build it on a smaller footprint, but would also incorporate the new MARTA red line into it as well. So the section inside the perimeter also features the MARTA red line running down the median, which is an interesting feature. Another interesting feature is the tunnel underneath the Atlanta Financial Center, which was built along with the freeway's initial construction in 1993. The compromise that was agreed to there was that the Robinson Humphrey Bank Company wanted to build their new office complex in the Buckhead section of Atlanta. And they wanted to build it, right where Georgia DOT wanted to build the 400 extension down into Midtown Atlanta. So after some, back and forth, Georgia DOT agreed to build the highway so long as they would provide this new, basically giant overpass for this building that became the Atlanta Financial Center. And the building was built, right after the highway was completed in 1993. Another interesting fact about the highway inside the perimeter is that it was built originally as a toll road. And it was operated by the old Georgia State Road and Tollway Authority, the SRTA. They collected tolls in both directions at a single toll plaza near the Lenox Road interchange, which has since been, the tolls, I believe, were eliminated sometime after 2011 when the original bonds to build the road were paid off. It was the first example of express toll collection in Georgia. They used something called a cruise card, which was the precursor to the Peach Pass that they use nowadays. And there were also, lanes for cash collection and stuff like that. But it's interesting that really the only toll road in Metro Atlanta was the 400 up until 2011, which was right around the time when the 85 Northeast Express lanes were converted from HOV to HOT use. Other freeways out in the burbs that we should talk about are 575, a spur off of the 75 Northwest corridor towards the far distant suburbs west of Lake Lanier. Part of the Northwest Corridor Improvement Project on I-75 also included project improvements on 575. So we were talking about reversible toll lanes on 75. A single reversible lane was added to by 575 as well for about its southernmost 8 or 9 miles as part of that project as well. And that's worth mentioning. Something else that's worth mentioning is I-985. This is another freeway spur off to the northeast of Atlanta, this time to the east of Lake Lanier. 985 came into existence in the 1980s. It was built out to its total length by 1986. It is one of the main highways that serves the community of Dawsonville, Georgia, which those of you who are interested in NASCAR probably are familiar with Dawsonville.
Oh, yeah.
It is the hometown of Bill Elliott, who was the 1988 NASCAR Cup champion. His son, Chase Elliott, won the championship in 2020. And there is a tradition in Dawsonville where, following a significant racing accomplishment made by either member of the Elliott family, that the siren on the Dawsonville pool room and tavern near the city center goes off to let everybody know. And I believe it was blaring all through the night when Chase Elliott won the championship a couple of years ago. Yep.
I just think that's so great.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a planner of a small town, and that kind of thing I just think is just awesome. Hometown pride!
Yeah, I mean, you know, these small southern towns, you know, they all seem to have these little things that they do that set them apart. Which is really cool. Another freeway we should talk about, 675. This is, you know, we were talking about 75 in the South Metro. This is an access point to get you from 75 to the southeastern perimeter, you know, well east of Atlanta Airport. The highway as it stands today has quite a wide right-of-way that it was built in, and they did this intentionally because they weren't really sure. First of all, it was a latecomer to the party as far as, you know, new freeways in Atlanta Metro were concerned. It wasn't completed until 1987, but there was some talk about possibly putting a MARTA transit line in the median of this highway. That never really came to pass. They were looking into other facilities, like, you know, possibly even extending the toll express lanes from the South Metro on up north this way. You know, bus lanes. They were looking into all sorts of different things, but nothing ever really, you know, got any traction. I mean, I guess the good thing about that is that there is still the right-of-way in the middle in case anything ever, you know, does, you know, gain traction.
Yeah, that is good.
We are going to revisit 675 later in this program, actually in a few short minutes probably, as it pertains to the unbuilt freeway legacy of Atlanta, because, well, I won't spoil it for you, but, you know.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah, I got something else here that's got a to be continued label on it, and that is the Langford Parkway, which, again, was part of the original Atlanta freeway master plan back in the 50s. It was intended to be a second east-west freeway for the south of Atlanta. It was originally known as the Lakewood Freeway, but it was renamed in honor of Arthur Langford Jr., who was an Atlanta city councilman and Georgia state senator in the 1980s and 90s. He was a community activist, I think you would say, you know, going back to his years as a student at Morris Brown College. Wasn't that one of the HBCUs in Atlanta? Morris Brown?
I am not sure.
I don't remember. I thought that name sounded familiar.
I don't think it was one of the ones that I previously mentioned. That doesn't necessarily... Yeah, because I mentioned about Morehouse, Spelman, and
That's
Clark
the one
Atlanta.
you mentioned. Okay. Yeah. But he was an ordained Baptist minister who served at the West Hunter Street Baptist Church as associate minister and the Rush Memorial Congregational Church as pastor for a number of years.
Oh, you know what? It is actually a private Methodist, historically black liberal arts college.
Oh, okay.
It's actually the first educational institution in Georgia to be owned and operated entirely by African Americans.
I didn't know that. Okay.
I did not. That is really cool.
Yeah, so the other thing I'll say about this highway is that it begins at the west perimeter and ends a short distance east of the downtown connector for reasons that we will discuss again in a short while. There you see the sudden end that the freeway comes to just east of the connector.
Ghost
there.
ramp.
Yeah, everyone's favorite, the ghost ramp. Stone Mountain Freeway. This is another one that's got
Oh, God.
another freeway with a to be continued label on it. Okay.
Oh, but there's a lot to talk about with this one.
There sure is,
Oh,
yeah.
God.
Well, as it stands right now, it is mainly signed as US 78. As far back as its planning in the 1950s and 60s, it was labeled on maps as Georgia Route 410. Georgia has this thing where they give the 400 series state highways to freeways, and most of these route numbers are unsigned because they overlap with existing interstates. Like, I think that, I-75 is like secret Georgia Route 403 or something like that. Like, Georgia has this weird system where they have to multiplex everything with an unsigned state highway. But so the 400 series was reserved for freeways, as you see here. I know you want to talk about Stone Mountain Park, and so do I.
Yes.
Oh,
God, yes.
Yeah, but I'll tell you a little bit about the park itself. It's a 3,200 acre park, way out east in DeKalb County. The mountain itself is quite an interesting geological feature. It stands with an elevation of about 1,700 feet above sea level. It's got a prominence of over 800 feet above the entire, surrounding landscape. So it certainly stands out above, for miles around. If you're not, enveloped in tree cover, you can certainly see it from a lot of different vantage points. But that's not the most controversial part of this whole thing. Of course, we have to talk about the carving, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we should, right?
Well, we need to, yeah.
Yeah, so Stone Mountain Park is probably most known in the South for the carving that was completed in 1972 that depicts 3 Confederate leaders, Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, and Stonewall Jackson. It is the largest sculpture of its type in the world. The carving itself is about 90 feet high and 190 feet wide and about 400 feet above the ground. The project really started to gain steam in the years after Reconstruction. It was advanced by the charter members of the United Daughters of the Confederacy. In 1941, Governor Eugene Talmadge formed the Stone Mountain Memorial Association to continue planning work on the memorial. But it was only really in the aftermath of the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court ruling and the subsequent birth of the Civil Rights Movement in 1958 that the Georgia legislature approved a measure to purchase the mountain for use in creating this, I guess what they would consider monument of some kind.
Yeah, so to give some background, before the state of Georgia purchased it, Stone Mountain was actually owned by the Venable brothers and was seen from the outset as a, quote, memorial to the Confederacy. It was actually considered the sacred site to members of the 2nd and 3rd National Clans. And basically the beginning of these particular, clans started on the Stone Mountain, and as part of their ceremony, they set up on the summit an altar, covered the flag, opened a Bible, and burned a 16-foot cross. And this was in 1915. James Venable later became an imperial wizard, which is like the top leader of the KKK. He owned the land at the base of the mountain, and then he granted the clan an easement in 1923 with perpetual right to hold celebrations as they desired. That property, however, was condemned in 1960 at the behest of the Stone Mountain Memorial Association. So this was a big, KKK site. The United Daughters of the Confederacy, the original sculptor that was chosen was actually Gutzen Borglum of Mount Rushmore fame. This was prior to Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
Basically, he was supposed to create the original sizable Civil War monument within 12 years from 1916, but by 1925 he was fired. Borglum destroyed his models and he claimed that they were his property, but the association disagreed, and there was conflict there, warrant for his arrest. But what's very interesting about all of this is that he had completed partially the face of Robert E. Lee, and they blasted that off the mountain in 1928.
Really?
So what you see is not the original carving there. And as you said, in response to the 1954 Brown versus Board of Ed ruling, in 1958, at the urging of segregationist Governor Griffin, that's when the Georgia legislature approved the measure to purchase a Stone Mountain, and then the new carving began in 1963. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. mentioned in his "I Have a Dream" speech, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a coincidence the date that Stone Mountain Park officially opened. It was April 14th, 1965, which was 100 years to the day after Abraham Lincoln's assassination. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oof. Basically, after the Charleston church shooting in mid-2015, that's when debates started about removal of the monument. However, this would require the approval of the Georgia legislature, as would any change to a quote-unquote military monument in the state.
Right, because it's important to mention that that's how it's classified. So that's how they kind of skirt around some of the rules and the regulations and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the park considered a proposal instead to add a permanent freedom bell, honoring Dr. King and that line in his speech, but that still maintains the Confederate monument. So there was not support for that. In August 2017, after the Unite the Right rally, talks came up again. Stacey Abrams actually called for the removal by sandblasting, calling it a blight upon our state. In August of 2017, that's actually the most recent instance of the Klan applying for a permit at Stone Mountain for a mountaintop cross burning. So the Klan is still very alive and active, and while they don't really they don't have the access to the site like they did, they wish they did.
Yeah, well,
it's very interesting because it became a huge game changer for me when I realized that the whole story with the original Borglum face of Lee being blasted off, and I mean, I think you know my thoughts on where to go with
Sure,
this.
sure,
Is
yeah.
I would be more than happy for it to be removed.
Yeah, you know, we've talked about Atlanta being this cosmopolitan metropolis, and Atlanta is very much a city that is very torn, I think. You know, they want to be the world class, Mecca, but they can't get out of the shadow of their Confederate roots either. And this is just another example of that. I mean, the thing that I think about when I come here and visit that is, what you think about messaging. You think about what do you want to convey with something like this. To me, it communicates a message of we're still here.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this to advocate for its removal. I'm saying this because think that the question needs to be asked: what is it that you really want to value, and what is it that you really want your city to be proud of, and what do you want your city to be remembered for? Because I think if you honestly address that question, then you can really come to a conclusion about what you really should have, out in public, that people can come and visit. I think that those two are very much connected.
Yeah.
It says a lot about what people in this area still value. Which, I don't know, we could go in a lot of different directions with that, but there's a lot that could be said. I think that something like this speaks for itself, and not a lot of it is good.
Right. I think it's interesting that, in 2015 that they had that proposal to, add the Freedom Bell. It seems like, once again, Atlanta trying to smooth over the racial tension and be like,
Yeah.
oh, separate but equal.
Yeah, that's another buzz phrase in the South, right? Yeah.
So yeah.
It's really, yeah. Atlanta's very interesting in a lot of ways, not just this, but when you think about the history of the city, how it came out of, it was born in the Confederacy. Its slogan and the seal of the city is resurgence. So, and it's the eagle, it's the phoenix emerging from the flames of the burning of the city in 1864. So it's their Confederate roots are really a big part of their identity even today, and certainly, obviously a lot of these southern cities can't help that fact. They've moved on in whatever way they can, but you just wonder if something like this, parading around a monument like that is a good idea in 2023, and I would think that it would not be, but that's one of those things that I'm sure is going to be a talking point for a long time to come.
Right.
Because I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon.
No.
We could sit here and talk about, well, it should come down and it should, we should do this and we should do that. Well, the bottom line is that ultimately the people of Georgia have to be the ones who make that decision.
Right.
And I don't see them being willing to do that, or make a decision that's different from the one that was already made.
Yeah.
Which would take a lot of effort, and it's a lot easier to keep the status quo, right?
Yeah.
We see that in politics in general. Not to go off on too much of a tangent here, but politics, it takes a lot of effort to change things, and it's not easy to summon all the effort that's necessary.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of politicians,
Yes.
although I think that the thing that I don't admire him so much as a politician, but I admire him for his work as a civil rights leader.
Yes.
Prior to his involvement in the U.S. Congress, and that is John Lewis.
Oh, yes.
Who we talked about quite a bit, when we did our Selma show last year. John Lewis as I said, was a member of Georgia's 5th Congressional District, which covers the city of Atlanta from 1987 until his death in 2020. He was an early leader in the civil rights movement in the late 50s, early 60s. He was involved in the Nashville sit-ins of 1960, the Freedom Rides of 1961. He was the chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee from 1963 to 66. He was also present at the first of the Selma to Montgomery marches related to voting rights in the state of Alabama. And he was present, obviously. That first march is famous for being known as Bloody Sunday at the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
Yep.
Which we talked about on that Selma show as well.
Yep.
So this Parkway, I suppose this kind of ties into what we're about to talk about with, the Atlanta Freeway revolts and all of this. But, the original idea behind the Stone Mountain Freeway was that it would extend westward from the perimeter into downtown Atlanta. And this Parkway was built in the 90s, kind of, using the right-of-way for that highway that was left unfinished in the 1970s by the Freeway revolts. It provides access to Freedom Park in East Atlanta, also the Jimmy Carter Center, which is the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library and Museum. It was mostly built as a at-grade, 4-lane, boulevard with some access control. There are some signalized intersections along the way as well, but they built the Parkway and then they developed the parkland around it. So it's kind of it's a nice little, urban green space drive. And this is one of the more famous views of all of Atlanta as far as, roads and stuff like that. This is from an overpass above the Parkway just east of downtown.
Gorgeous view.
Isn't it? It's nice, right? We've seen a lot of very nice views around downtown Atlanta over the course of this show. So maybe some of you out there are getting ideas for places that you would like to visit at some point.
Definitely.
Honorable mention time, real quick. I'm going to zip through these as fast as I can. The 14 connector is the South Fulton Parkway, which is a freeway spur off of the southwestern perimeter and I-85 junction west of Atlanta Airport. Georgia 316 has a short freeway section off of the I-85 Northeast corridor towards the suburbs of Lawrenceville and Athens. Athens is, of course, where the University of Georgia is located. Georgia 141, the part of that is a freeway known as the Peachtree Industrial Boulevard, which is a spur off of the northeastern perimeter towards Peachtree Corners and Chamblee. We didn't really talk much about the other interstates well outside of Atlanta, but the two that I would like to single out here are 185, which is a spur down towards Columbus and Fort Benning Military Base in far southwestern Georgia, and 520, which is it was originally built as a spur off of I-20 into the south of Augusta, Georgia, but it ended up being extended in the 80s and the 90s into the full loop that it is today. So it is a rare example of a loop freeway that has a spur route number, 520. So the original section of it, the Georgia section, was all that they were intending to build originally when they assigned the number. And eventually South Carolina was like, hey, what about us? so they got the idea to extend it, over into South Carolina and tie it back into I-20 on their side of the state line. And so now it's a full, loop highway. That's another interesting Georgia freeway drive as well. Also, if you really like airport terminal highways, you could literally get lost within the complex that is Atlanta Airport. There's a lot of, borderline freeway driving within the airport complex itself. That's a lot of fun to drive. Plus, airports are generally known for being home to non-standard signage and stuff like that, and the Atlanta Airport certainly has a lot of that as well. All right, it's everybody's favorite part of the program.
Mr. Angry!
That's right. So we have a few freeways here that I want to highlight. And we're going to kind of go through these one at a time. And we're also going to talk about some of the key players here in the freeway revolts of the 1970s. So I've got these 5 freeways here listed. We've already kind of mentioned some of them in passing. But, well, actually, I don't have 5 freeways here, do I?
No, you have 3.
I think
With 2 other bullet points that you elaborate on other slides.
I can't count tonight. Okay, yeah. So there's the 3 big ones, and then we have other topics that we want to talk about as well. So, okay.
Actually, go back to the map.
Which one?
I think you should point out which one is which.
Okay, so we were talking about the Lakewood Freeway, which is Georgia 166, which was originally planned to be Interstate 420. So the section of it that exists is down here, and it ends just east of the downtown connector. It would have extended east to meet up with I-20 in East Atlanta, along this alignment here. The Stone Mountain extension, coming westward from the perimeter out this way, and coming into town here. Part of this alignment, again, is utilized by the John Lewis Freedom Parkway today. And then the other big highway we have to talk about is what I consider to be Downtown Connector East. It was a second north-south freeway intended to serve downtown and East Atlanta. It would have basically run from where the 400 meets I-85 to where 675 meets the perimeter. So it would have created a single continuous second north-south highway, if you will, for downtown and midtown Atlanta.
Yeah. And then I think you should point out too, I-485 would have taken which routes that they would have taken.
Yeah, so you can skip ahead a little bit here. So parts of this were intended for the interstate system. So as I mentioned, like I-420 is here. It's listed on this map from the early 80s. This is the eastern continuation of the Lakewood Freeway. And it's got the dotted line and all that. It's supposed to terminate here at I-20 in East Atlanta. I-485 was intended to be designated along parts of the Stone Mountain Freeway and also the eastern downtown connectors. So this arm here so basically from downtown Atlanta east along the Stone Mountain corridor and then turning north along the downtown eastern connector, if you will.
And where would have been that interchange is actually now the location of the Jimmy Carter Library and Museum.
That's right.
And we'll go into a little more detail about that too.
Yep.
There's another good map to see.
Yeah, so this kind of highlights what we just talked about with 485. Where it begins here at the current Freedom Parkway interchange and then turning north on an alignment roughly along what you see penned in here in red to tie in with what is eventually built as the 400 extending northward from I-85. But I suppose we should go back and talk about some of the events and some of the key figures in all of this.
Oh, yeah.
And all of that jazz, right?
Yeah. I mean, the Stone Mountain Freeway extension is the longest and most famous example. That lasted over 30 years from the early 1960s until the final construction of Freedom Parkway. And then we talked a little bit already about Downtown Connector East. Let's
talk about some of the people that you see on the screen here. So I've got, on the left here, we have Jimmy Carter, who as a former U.S. president, but before he was president, he was busy being the governor of Georgia from 1971 to 75. During his term of governor, he was very sympathetic towards the pro-freeway segment of the Georgia Highway Department, who wanted to force these proposed freeways through East Atlanta. On the other side of the ledger, you had this gentleman on the bottom right, Maynard Jackson, who was elected mayor of Atlanta in 1973. Prior to that, he was vice mayor. He served, I believe, 3 terms, 1974 to 82, and then again in the early 90s. He's one of the longest-serving mayors in Atlanta history, I think.
That's correct. And he strongly opposed the construction of freeways through in-town neighborhoods, knowing that they would destroy thriving communities.
Yeah, well, we should talk about what is in town. So, like, we hear about, you'll hear, the term in town Atlanta referred, discussed. And what that loosely refers to is the neighborhoods that are just east of downtown and midtown Atlanta. That's what people call in town. It's kind of a bit of a local terminology that you don't hear very often, but that's kind of what we're talking about when we mention in town Atlanta.
Yeah, and caution was the Citizens Against Unnecessary Thoroughfares in Older Neighborhoods. They were a 1970s to 80s neighborhood group in Atlanta that fought the construction of the Presidential Parkway, which was initially intended to be an elevated multi-lane highway with limited access. If you don't mind, I'd love to go through kind of the whole timeline.
Yeah, go ahead.
Of, these freeway plans. And the freeway revolts. Mm-hmm. So in 1964 is when the Georgia Highway Department announced plans to build I-485. In May 1965 is when the Morningside Lenox Park Association was formed to fight the highway. They hired planners that suggested an alternative route.
Yeah, and I want to put that on the screen
here
real quick. Yeah, that is this picture on the right. So you see how there's two different alignments being proposed here for the section of the northern arm of 485 that was proposed.
Yeah, and so as a result of that, a dueling civic association was formed called the Morningside Monroe Civic Association.
I love this, by the way. Isn't this great? Like, wait, you want to put it in our neighborhood? Well, we're going to create our own organization. Screw you.
Yeah.
Dueling neighborhoods.
Dueling neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So in February 1966, the original route was chosen through Morningside. MLPA filed a lawsuit to try and stop construction. It was denied in later in 66. They appealed. That was denied in 67. But nonetheless, the road was eventually stopped. MLPA negotiated designing changes between 1967 and 1970. And then in 1971, another lawsuit was filed with a different organization. And then during this time, you had federal roadblocks that started to come up, right? So, as you mentioned on this slide, right? So NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, was passed in 1969. You had a Supreme Court decision to stop I-40 being built through Memphis Park in Tennessee.
That was a big one.
That was a very big one. And so then, as you mentioned, Jimmy Carter became Georgia governor. He served from 1971 to 1975. The Georgia DOT was then headed by his friend Burt Lance. But he continued to fight for the freeway construction. Another civic association called the Virginia Highland Civic Association fought the road. And a coalition was formed with residents of Inman Park and other neighborhoods. Then you have, again, the rise of Maynard Jackson as mayor, Jimmy Carter and his sympathetic, and he created what was called the Environmental Bill of Rights in 1973, although he was suspected of continuing secretly supporting the freeway as late as August 1973. But in June 1973, the federal DOT rejected the environmental impact study, citing its underassessment of impact on in-town neighborhoods. So basically, in 1975, Governor George Busbee instructed the Georgia Highway Department to remove it from I-45 from the long-term plan. And that was considered I-495's definitive death knell.
Yeah.
And then Jimmy Carter became president.
He sure did.
He sure did. From 1977 to 1981. Which adds a kind of twist to this story. Mm-hmm. Because then in 1981, he revived the idea of the highway.
Yeah, he's like, you know what?
You know what? We kind of need a highway to serve my planned presidential library.
Yeah, exactly.
And he initially bought only several acres of land, but the Georgia DOT leased him 29 more acres in exchange for backing plans for a 2.9-mile east-west expressway. on the condition that if the road were not built, he would lose the land, which would be his parking and gardens. So, in 1984, he broke ground on the center, and that's where caution really comes in.
Yeah.
Caution comes to fight and say, and the construction, the initial presidential parkway was going to be a multi-lane highway with limited access. They lobbied it until 1991. And ultimately, where the tide changed kind of came about with the announcement of Atlanta hosting the Olympics. At that point, court order mediation between representatives of GDOT, the City of Atlanta, and Caution reached a mediated settlement to an at-grade meandering parkway surrounded by parkland.
Yeah. So, I mean, they built the roadway within the right-of-way, but they built a much more scaled-down version of the original plan.
Correct.
And they implemented a lot more green space into the plan than was originally offered.
Correct. And they didn't build it, and as you can see on the map, right, you had the proposed terminus, and then, the actual terminus is much further west.
Right.
That land continues to be parkland, but there's no road in it.
I believe that's Freedom Park, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. It's interesting to note that the freeway revolts in general, from the 70s through the 80s, really strengthened neighborhood organizations in Atlanta. And this becomes interesting when you consider that the community grassroots organizations in Atlanta hold a lot more influence in city decisions compared to other major U.S. cities, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
And it's really born out of that collective unity that these neighborhoods forged with each other, fighting the East Atlanta freeway proposals.
Oh, yeah. And these things, were influenced by all the other fights that citizens of Atlanta have fought for the past 150 years.
Sure,
in regards to, civil rights. And I think that's also, what ultimately has led to, the civil rights movement led into the Freeway revolts, which has led to the strengthening of neighborhood organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there was one last Hail Mary pass attempted with I-485, and it came about 15 years ago in the form of a proposal to build basically a tunnel between the south end of the 400, where it ties into I-85, and the north end of 675 at the southeast perimeter. Let's just say that this idea never really had much of a chance from the beginning. It sounds lovely when you mention the idea of building a tunnel, many miles long to connect, this same corridor. Realistically, though, it never really had much of a chance, and it still would have, even if it was a good idea, it would have still faced the same obstacles that the East Atlanta freeway proposals of the 60s and 70s faced. So, you know what I like to say. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
This is not to say that that project wouldn't be useful in some respect. We were talking about, even with the Freeing the Freeways program that we mentioned, which was basically executed in response to the cancellation of the East Atlanta Freeway network. So Atlanta basically still got the lane miles that they were looking for. It just was on the existing corridors and not on new corridors that were added later. But even with that, the traffic continued to be a problem. And, there have been many different ideas and schemes about how to address congestion in Atlanta. And I don't really know what the real answer is. Part of the problem is that Atlanta has always kind of been screwed. Going back to when it was founded in 1836, it was founded as a railroad hub. It was a very attractive location for railroads from all across the South to converge, going up to Tennessee, going out to the Atlantic coast, going, westward, southward. Atlanta was very quickly, by the time of the Civil War, it was a very popular hub for transportation. And this carried over through the railroad era and up until the 20th century, and now it's, a major hub in the automobile era. I mean, if you look at this map that we're looking at, you have 3 major interstates that converge in Atlanta. And these are not, this isn't like Birmingham where you have like I-59 and I-22 and all these highways no one cares about. This is I-75, which goes from Florida to Canada. You've got I-85, which goes from the Northeast Corridor down to the Gulf Coast. And you've got I-20, which basically crisscrosses the South, from South Carolina to Texas. I mean, these are three of the most important mainline interstate corridors in America. And they all converge here in Atlanta. And that's kind of a carryover from the railroad days. Like all the major railroad networks in the South converged in Atlanta. That's just kind of how it happened. So I would say that when people ask, like, what is the solution? I don't know what the solution is because Atlanta's always kind of been destined to be the crossroads of America in some respects. Atlanta's always been screwed, if you think about it. No, I mean, I'm serious. Like, whether it's the railroad era, whether it's, the Civil War and, the Union understanding how important the city was from a transportation standpoint, to, the U.S. government understanding how important Atlanta would be as a crossroads of an interstate system. Atlanta was always destined to have a bad case of traffic overload, no matter how many freeways you put there. Just because of the importance of the city, the importance of the highways that all converge there. And I don't know what the solution is. I'm not sure there is one. Atlanta is always, in my opinion, destined to be a bad spot because of its history and because of its importance in the national, transportation system. People in the city itself might not like that, but that's kind of the way that the cookie crumbles, when it comes to this country. There are certain places in America that have always been more important than others, like from a transportation crossroads standpoint. And Atlanta is one of those cities that when you look at it on a map, you might not necessarily think that it should be one of these places, but it just kind of, sometimes it's because of political influence, sometimes it's just dumb luck. But sometimes there are certain places that become that important. And Atlanta became one of those places. And in becoming one of those places, they are destined to have a future where traffic congestion is a daily problem that doesn't really have a good solution.
Yeah.
And I said before when we were talking about the perimeter, if they wanted to build the perimeter right, they would do what I said. In having, a New Jersey Turnpike, car lanes and truck lanes. But I mean, the truck lane idea goes back to what I said about banning trucks downtown. Enforcing all the trucks around the perimeter, which is never a good idea. If you're trying to, label a highway as a bypass, you want to make it so that it's a bypass. It's not the only way that you can go. Right. So it kind of defeats the purpose of having it if you're just going to force a lot of your traffic onto it anyway.
But meanwhile, it's funny, right? Because I'm coming at this from the urban planning standpoint. Like, traffic is a nightmare, but it's a nightmare for a good reason. Because it's such a thriving city.
Well, that's true.
And that it's a good thing. That it's a cosmopolitan hub in the southern U.S. and it means there's a lot of activity and a lot of people on the move and a lot of people, getting around and doing things, and I think that that's a good thing. I mean, nobody likes sitting in traffic, of course, but the traffic is there for good reasons. But
well, think about the number that I said before about the number of people who use the perimeter on a given day. Over 2 million that use parts of that highway in a 24-hour period. Yeah, I mean, it's just incredible.
Yeah.
And so much of that traffic is, as I said, long-distance traffic using those mainline interstates that all converge in Atlanta. Why do they converge in Atlanta? Well, part of it is because it's a carryover from its importance as a crossroads of the railroad industry, and we know it as a crossroads of the Civil War, and so it's always been that crossroads, right? So
right. Well, the good news is that MARTA was created.
Yes, give us some good news, will you?
Good news! Traffic may suck on the road, but there's a transit rail option. Yay!
MARTA's a very interesting system. Yeah, I did get to ride a little bit of it when I was down there.
You know what's cool about MARTA? Fun fact, the first rail service commenced on my birthday in 1979. June 30th.
Was it really your birthday?
June 30th, 1979.
Wow, okay.
I mean, I was born in 87, but we share a birthday.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so out of the cancellation of the East Atlanta Freeway network, and while the Freeing the Freeways program was being drawn up and parts of it were starting to be implemented, there was a cultural shift in Atlanta towards more mass transit as a way to, work their way out of traffic congestion. And this is where the MARTA rail transit system really came into being. It was built mostly in the 1970s. There are parts of it that are a bit newer than that. For example, the red line up north of the perimeter is relatively recent. It's one of the more recent sections. The MARTA system. Where's the stats that I got here? It's a hybrid above ground and below ground system. I believe the lowest elevation point is 120 feet below grade at Peachtree Center, and the highest point in the system is about 90 feet where the King Memorial Station is located. So there's an interesting history here with the funding of MARTA. So MARTA has about 48 miles of route, 38 rail stations. There are 4 different lines, and I can put them on the screen here so you can see them. A lot of the originally proposed system in the 60s was built with some exceptions. You'll notice that there is no trackage outside of the perimeter, virtually, other than the North Springs section there up at the top. Although there were proposals for lines outside the perimeter, like you see on the map on the left. This was one of the schemes that they came up with for possible lines, that crisscross the metro. The funding of metro is important. The funding of MARTA is important to talk about because it was done on a per county basis. And this is kind of where I will finish my point that I started a little while ago about certain counties making certain decisions in Metro Atlanta. So counties such as Cobb County and Gwinnett County have long been opponents to the MARTA system and are not actually served by MARTA to this day. Counties such as Fulton, DeKalb, and Clayton, they by referendum approved funding for the MARTA system over the years, and so now they are included in the system. So it's interesting how in Atlanta Metro you have this divide at the county level. There are some counties who want to be included in the mass transit system of the city of Atlanta. You have some counties that don't want any part of it. And so what ended up happening was that MARTA really just became something that served the city itself, and it didn't really serve what was originally its vision, which was to serve commuter traffic from the suburbs. Yeah. And this was down largely to objections on the county level because, there's a lot of different ways we could say it, but the white flight of the 70s and how those people sort of took hold in the outer ring suburbs. They wanted no part of a mass transit system that largely served the poorer communities of Atlanta itself. So, there was a lot of resistance towards bringing their communities into the fold with and mixing them in with the city neighborhoods that many of the residents left the city in the first place to get away from.
Oh, yeah. I have a quote here from David Chestnut, who was a white chairman of MARTA. He said in 1987 that suburban opposition to mass transit had been 90% a racial issue.
And I'm sure you could say that in a lot of cities, not just Atlanta.
Although, interestingly, even as the suburbs have become more diverse, they still remain opposed to MARTA. So
that's interesting too,
yes.
Especially Gwinnett County, which had another referendum in 2019 to enter the MARTA system, and it was rejected again. even though Gwinnett has become a bit more, what would you say? Like racially mixed? Is that the right way to say it?
Diverse?
Diverse, yeah.
I'd say racially diverse.
Yeah. But yeah, they rejected it again. So yeah, there's still kind of like this, I don't know what you call it, but like tradition or,
I guess you would call it like that, that sort of old school American dream, isolationist, mentality of, like, oh, well, I have a car and I drive around. Other people just need to save their money and do that too.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's only going to bring in, those people.
Yeah. So the MARTA system was built and it looks really nice, but it really failed to meet its primary objective, which was to make commuting from the suburbs more appealing by non-vehicle methods. Because as I said, at a county level, a lot of these communities rejected the system and wanted no part of it. As we said, Gwinnett County rejected another referendum in 2019. I believe Clayton County joined the system in 2014. But yeah, as of right now, there's no trackage going out that way. Clayton County is south of the perimeter. And there's, as I said, there's no service south of the airport. The MARTA system is nice for what it is. It's useful if you're like, let's say you're on business in Atlanta and you can get to downtown pretty easily without getting in a car, because there's the MARTA station right at the airport, which is very useful.
Yes. I will say this, that, we talk about how there's still opposition today, but the opposition, the percentage is changing. So looking at Gwinnett County, in 1971 when they voted it down, they voted it down by a nearly 4-1 margin. And whereas in 2019, it was voted down by, an 8-point margin.
Yeah, I think that 1971 figure you give is similar to the margin in other counties like Clayton and in Cobb County.
Yeah.
But I don't think Cobb has ever really reconsidered.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's a huge difference between, 80% of people voting it down and, it failing by an 8-point margin.
Yeah, and there has been a bit of a sea change in Georgia, especially this century. You're starting to get a lot more, transplants moving down there. So it's becoming, even the suburbs are becoming much more of a melting pot than they ever were before. And so I think that's part of what you're seeing there.
Yeah.
So the melting pot is not just happening in Atlanta proper, it's happening out in these outer ring suburbs as well.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see, like, as that trend continues in the years ahead, what that does for Metro Atlanta politically. Because all of these decisions involving road and rail transit infrastructure and investment, they are rooted in political decisions. So, as your voter electorate evolves and changes, you would think that so would your decision making and your policies in that regard. So Atlanta's one of those areas that I think will be interesting to watch in the years ahead. As far as, the decisions that were made in the 70s, they wouldn't be so popular with today's voting electorate, right?
Right.
So I have one last thing I want to offer you, and that is, we were talking about Hail Mary passes before with the I-675 tunnel through East Atlanta. Georgia planners have known for a while that the perimeter has been a problem. And the question is, what do you do about it? And I'm not sure that there is one solution that fixes the problem. But I will give them credit for thinking a little bit outside of the box with this one. There was a proposal for an outer perimeter, and the one section of it that really, got off the ground somewhat and made some waves in the community was a section north of town that became known as the Northern Arc, between I-75 near Cartersville and I-85 near Lawrenceville. This highway never really got built, or obviously it didn't get built, but it never really advanced too far beyond the early planning stages. It did get so far as receiving an official route number in the Georgia DOT log. It would have been signed as Highway 500. Probably would have been built as a toll road, some sort of turnpike. And I use the turnpike term because they were considering only building interchanges in a few locations at the freeways that it would cross. So you would only have like 3 intermediate interchanges along the length of this highway. The idea there was that they were trying to cut down on additional sprawl in the north suburbs. So by only providing interchanges at intersecting freeways, you wouldn't necessarily be making it more appealing for local residents to use. This would be more useful as a through traffic bypass for long distance traffic, which in concept is not a bad idea. It's just that new freeway construction in Georgia and in a lot of places in America has become a very toxic topic. And so that's kind of where the Northern Arc was dead on arrival. But it is an interesting idea, and it's an outside-of-the-box idea that I wouldn't be surprised if we see it reappear at some point in the future. Because as I said, Atlanta is kind of stuck with what they've got inside the perimeter. So really the only improvements you can make are in the outer suburbs to try to divert traffic away from the city before it even gets into the metro. If your goal is to send the traffic that's long distance on these mainline routes, keep them on their way, but have them go around the Atlanta metro, to sort of free up the space for the traffic that is inside the perimeter and is already well established.
Yeah.
Well, that's all we got on this PowerPoint.
I know. We covered a lot of material.
we covered a lot tonight in 2 hours.
We did.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you, Dan.
This was good.
This was really good.
We'll be back next week. Well, I'll be back next week. We'll have more Atlanta talk in the form of a virtual tour, which will partially include a lap around the Atlanta perimeter. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, no, I may end up breaking my streak next week.
You're gonna call in for like 5 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
You'll make an appearance.
I will make an appearance.
Yeah. So that'll be next week's show.
Yes.
I have some footage I would like to show you. We have to be off the air by about 8 o'clock because I got a football game to watch tonight.
That's right. We have dinner to eat.
We do. I know. We're putting off dinner. We put off all that stuff because we gotta do the show at a little bit earlier an hour because of the football conflict.
Who are the Titans playing?
Jacksonville. Yeah, it's basically it's a play-in game.
Okay.
This is why they.
Ooh. Well, I mean, I want to win.
Yeah.
I also want the Titans to win, but I obviously I don't follow the team, so I don't know statistically. Not that any of that crap matters, because at the end of the day, both Super Bowls that the Baltimore Ravens won, all the commentators were there.
Yeah.
So I know that we can speculate all day, and by the time the game happens, it can be a totally different story. But at this point, based on the season.
Tennessee goes into the game losing 6-0. Jacksonville. They're certainly the favorites in this game. They're playing in Jacksonville. Take something of a miracle for the Titans tonight if they
is tonight. Damar Hamlin and the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, do we want to? Yeah, well, we should talk about that. We didn't mention that at the opening.
No, we didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was.
Damar Hamlin. I'm sorry, I missed his name.
On Monday night, I was getting ready for bed, and I was checking my Facebook statuses one more time, and Jeff Kitsko put up a status, saying something to the effect of, this is the first time I've ever seen, CPR administered to a player on the field, or he said something to that effect, and I'm like, what? So I turned on the game, knowing that was the only game that was on that night, and that's how I figured out what was going on. And it's just, from everything that you read about what happened, on the field that night to, the recovery that he's made, it's a miracle that he's still with us.
It's a literal miracle.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at a news story from an hour ago. He made a post on Instagram that he's thankful for the love he's received. When you put real love out into the world, it comes back to you 3 times as much. The love has been overwhelming, but I'm thankful for every single person that prayed for me and reached out. If you know me, you know this. This only gone make me stronger, he added. On a long road, keep praying for me. And you know what? I'm very much a praying person, and I have been praying so much for his recovery. I donated money to the GoFundMe.
Yes, you should mention his charity that he has.
Yes.
I think there's over $7 million that's been donated as of today.
So as of 3 hours ago, the Chasing M Foundation, the Chasing M's Foundation Community Toy Drive surpasses 8.25 million.
Wow!
It's just incredible because this was a GoFundMe that was meant for a one-time toy drive in December. I think it was December 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And the Buffalo Bills fan base, they have this tradition of donating to the football player charities.
Yeah, they do, don't they?
And so when this happened,
that's interesting.
It was very much like, you know what? This is how we're going to show our love and support and help. Is we're going to donate to his foundation.
Yeah.
And it melts my heart, that so many people, not just Bills fans, but people all over, and I felt touched and I donated. And it's just, it's great. It's going to help out kids in Pittsburgh. And
right, because he's from Pittsburgh originally.
He is, yeah. And it's just incredible, the amount of love and support. You know what? I'm gonna read the update. Oh, you know what? Okay, so I just pulled it up. 8.2 million.
Yeah.
240,100 donors. That is so cool. When you think about how many people that is, and people putting in, even if they don't have very much, just you think about how many people that is that say, you know what, maybe I don't have a lot to give, but I can give enough, to give one kid a toy.
Mm-hmm.
And it blows my mind, right? Basically, according to them, that the team at Jaster Athletes has been posting fundraiser updates, and they're going to work with the Hamlin family, the Chasing M Foundation, and the GoFundMe team to deliver the safe delivery of funds. Basically, beyond toy drives, the foundation supports back-to-school drives, kids camps, and more.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just think it's great. I'm sorry, I'm having
Isn't that great?
Yeah. I'm over here I'm about to go into tears. Like I said, I'm very much a praying person, and I've been really, really,
Oh, yeah.
praying for his recovery, and it's some very good news on the football front.
Sure. Yeah, well, as you said, as we just watched 400 South through the inside the perimeter section. Here's the northbound trip on the downtown connector. Yeah, right. The Bills Mafia, as they're known, they have a history of donating to NFL related charities, and one of the more interesting examples of this was when it must have been like what was it, 5 or 6 years ago now, when the Bills had missed the playoffs for like 18 straight years. And they got into the playoffs because I think it was Cincinnati, of all teams, that beat Baltimore in the final game of the season.
Yep.
On some sort of miracle play. And so, like, they all donated to Cincinnati's quarterback at the time, I think was Andy Dalton, if I'm not mistaken. So Andy Dalton had a charity in Cincinnati, and they donated to his charity as
Right.
sort of a thanks to, hey, thanks for helping us out,
And you know what? And the Bills fans actually donated more than $400,000 to Baltimore Ravens player Lamar Jackson's favorite charity.
Oh, okay.
So it's just it's just amazing that they did that.
There's something about Western New York. I don't know what it is.
You know what? I have a theory as somebody coming from a Rust Belt city.
Okay.
You know, Buffalo is also a Rust Belt city like Baltimore. And when you're from a Rust Belt city, there's a lot of bad news, right? Your city's shrinking. A lot, industry's gone away.
Right, yeah.
But one thing that unites everybody as a city is their team. It's something to have pride in.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge deal in Baltimore. The Ravens are a huge thing that we rally behind. And it's sort of our hometown pride. And so, my theory is that it's the same way for the Bills Mafia in Buffalo. That the team really is, there. That brings everybody together. And, Buffalo's been through a lot lately.
Yeah, well, a lot of different things.
A lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
Mass shooting, fatalities, and worst blizzard they've had in God knows how long.
Oh my God, that was insane.
Yeah.
Looking at the footage of that, yeah. I went to college in Buffalo, so I got to sit through a couple of pretty big storms, but we didn't have anything like that when I was in school. That was incredible. But yeah. When the road meet is there in July, it will not be snowing. I think I can promise you that.
Yes.
Ta-da! Yep. So this is the quintessential Atlanta freeway drive. It's how many lanes across here? I think it's 7 or 8 lanes across per direction at points along the way here. Certainly a marvel of the interstate system. It's a road that everybody curses at rush hour, but if you're driving it at the right time of the week,
like my family did, because I was amazed at how fast people were driving and passing each other, and it's like,
yeah. But all of these Atlanta videos that that I'm showing here, they've been on the channel for a while now, so I don't think we need to rehash everything. But I do want to show you a couple of these that are my favorites. And then, of course, next week we'll be doing the lap around the perimeter, so I'll be saving that footage for next week. But I do think we are going to wrap up in a few minutes here. If anybody has any more questions, comments, anything that they want to throw our way, we'll certainly address them at this point. But yeah, so it's Atlanta's a really interesting city. I'll say in closing that it's a really neat city. It's got a lot of really interesting history. From a planning perspective, it's a fascinating place. Because of kind of what we've talked about already on the show about its roots and how it came to be, and how those things continue to kind of sort of exist in the background and help influence policy. I think that's a pretty innocent way to say it.
yeah.
So there's a lot to dive into, from a planning perspective, from a socioeconomic perspective. So it's a really interesting city, and I'm sure that there's a lot more that we could have covered that we didn't get to tonight, but hopefully we've done a decent job of giving you a nice overview.
Yeah.
Oh, Laura, what do you think?
What do I think? About what?
Oh, what do you want to say in closing? What's your parting shot? Screw you, roadway whiz.
No, quite the opposite. I'm just so thankful for everybody watching live, everybody who's, watching this, later, next week, next year, next decade. It just, I'm so thankful for the fans and the viewers, subscribers, that we have this opportunity to talk about this material. I think and I'm very appreciative to Dan that we're able to really dive deep on some of these, hard topics. And it's hard. I lead a very busy life, right?
You sure do, yeah.
I work full time as a planner of a small town. I have an amazing 3.5-year-old. Basically, I do my research in the middle of the night.
Yeah, you do.
when I can't sleep. Yeah. So it's so, I'm just so thankful, and I have so much gratitude for you and the channel and everybody watching, that I have this avenue to be able to share this stuff.
That's kind of what the channel has turned into. It's become a forum for these kind of discussions. That, in the first 10 years or so of the channel, all it was just uploading, videos of, just like this,
But there's still a lot of that.
Well, I mean, that's still kind of central to what, the channel is, I suppose.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? Here's the thing. There's nothing wrong with, it's kind of fun. I enjoy actually putting on some of my favorite music and watching some of these videos.
Oh, sure.
As somebody who leads a very busy life and I don't get to travel all these roads, it's, amazing to be able to travel them through the videos. But you're right. I love that we've been able to dive deep.
Yeah.
Into some of these other topics.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's kind of one of those unintended consequences of doing this, I think.
Yeah.
Is that it's kind of turned into a forum for us to discuss a lot of things that, number one, aren't really brought up in other parts of, road enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And we get to do so with a lot of people who are really, interesting people. I mean, you're not so bad yourself.
Oh, thank you.
But no, it's really good to, when we get people, together who are engineers, who are planners, who are, travelers, who are,
just enthusiasts that love roads.
And you get the enthusiast angle on it too, and you get the historian angle on it, and all that. It's really interesting when you get all of those people together. One of the things that I really enjoy about it is that you always hear something that you didn't know before.
Yeah.
I
have learned so much from so many people in this community.
Yeah, it's so many. Every show I do, I learn something from you guys. Yeah. And that's not something that I was expecting. I know that our audience expects to learn new things every time they tune in, but I find myself learning new things that I didn't know.
Oh, same.
And it's really interesting because, you hear somebody else say something from a different perspective who comes from a different background, and they come at the same topic from a different point of view, and you walk away from that discussion really appreciating that person's point of view, but also you come away learning a different angle about why decisions are made, and sort of the backstory behind them, and it really enriches your overall knowledge and experience. And
definitely,
that's one of the things that I'm most thankful for for doing these shows the last 3 years, is that it's really kind of helped me learn a lot.
It's really helped me learn a lot. It's been kind of a lifeline for me in a lot of ways, right? Because, like, being a mom of, a young kid, it's weird. She was an infant, and really, she's on the edge of not being a toddler anymore. Soon, she's going to be a preschooler.
I know, it's crazy.
And then a schooler.
Oh, my God.
Oh, my God. But it's just so cool to be able to engage in this personal and professional interest while having so many other exciting things going on in my life. Yeah. Being a mom and working and...
Yeah, we all have our own, separate identities, I think.
Yeah.
most of the people that I have on these shows, well, maybe not most of them, but a lot of them have their own websites or are tied to a website.
Yeah.
Like you're hitched to the AARoads train at this point.
Oh, yeah. I do have my own website, too. It's mrsmdroads.com.
Have you ever plugged that site
I
on
have
here?
Not.
I don't remember you ever bringing it up.
Yeah, surprise. I have a website that I don't ever plug.
Well, would you like to talk about that site?
Sure.
And what kind of content is on that?
So, mrsmdroads.com is one of the many domain names I own for it because I've sort of struggled to figure out what to do with it. I started this website in 2017 as an outlet to get my graduate thesis out to the world. My graduate thesis is called Helping the Last, the Least, and the Lost: Compassionate Planning for Baltimore's Unsheltered Homelessness. And so I thought that it was going to be, as I graduated, my initial posts were all about, the work I had done. And then as I graduated and I've done different things in the past, 5+ years, I've struggled with, do I want to focus on, writing strictly about homelessness? Do I want to start branching out other topics? Oh, wait, now I have, a kid and, I'm working in transportation planning and now I'm working as a generalist comprehensive planner. And so I guess I haven't really plugged it because I haven't done a whole lot with it. But if nothing else, the material is there. I'm still very proud of the work I did. I did a poster presentation that won an award in 2018 on my graduate work. And I wrote a post I'm really proud of talking about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s work in advocacy, and that's really what his focus had turned towards right before his assassination.
Yeah, he was starting to go down that path, wasn't he?
He was.
Yeah. So it's really a tragic loss.
Yeah.
In that sense, also.
I mean,
obviously, in a lot of ways, it is, but.
The Poor People's Campaign is still going on today. They usually meet up annually in mid-June.
Do they?
Yes, which is in D.C., which is good and bad because, that's Rainy's birthday. And so I'm usually very, busy with that. Who knows? Maybe one day she'll be like, on my blank birthday, I'm going to go to D.C. to do the Poor People's Campaign stuff. But anyway.
So it's mrsmdroads.com.
Yeah?
mrsmdroads.com. Okay.
But yeah, so it's out there. You can read some of my work. I've done some individual blog posts. I've been thinking about in 2023 how I want to, I've been thinking back to what I want to do with the site and do I want to use it to plug some of the work I've done here? Because I'm really proud of a lot of these episodes.
Well, you've always done great work for these
you.
shows. And it's always great to have you on because I love having the planner's perspective on things.
Well, thank you.
Because so much of the decisions that, go into the building of these highways happen at a planning level. And planners are brought in to, figure out, what the best options are. So it's always interesting to get, the planning angle on these cities and how things happened. And I know that you're very passionate about the planning and the history of, urban development and civil rights and all that stuff. And as we've kind of discussed in a lot of our shows over the years, like there's a very common place where those three come together, as it pertains to road infrastructure and, construction and that kind of thing, in transit systems and, transit, that's another, rabbit hole we could go down. I know that we kind of scratched the surface when we were talking about MARTA tonight, but, yeah, it's all kind of related.
It very much is.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, I haven't written a post since May 20th, 2020. But, the tagline I have on my site, Mrs. Maryland Roads, is Laura Bianca Pruitt, writing on the topics that mean a lot to her.
Well, I would say that's true, yeah.
So I think that basically what it comes down to is, maybe I need to figure out, maybe I write about the things that I'm doing or the things that I'm, passionate about. And I don't know. If anybody has any ideas, throw it in the chat, please.
I think that's a good idea, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, at least Rainy's watching.
Yes, she is.
Future planner.
Yes, she could very well be.
Yeah, you got to coach her up,
I know. We could, we very well could be. There's,
Yep. We are watching
But
footage
of course, if she becomes an engineer, bridge engineer, I would still be very proud of her.
Well, gee,
who knows?
I mean, I would be proud of her certainly if that was her choice.
Yeah, or anything really. I'd be proud no matter what.
Absolutely.
No matter what.
I would never want to force my kid down a certain path.
No.
Certainly, based on what I've done with my life.
Right.
Let them kind of figure out what they want to do themselves.
Yeah.
And if they want to do the same thing you did, then that's great,
That's
right. Certainly wouldn't hurt, right?
That's right. Oh, Mike actually wrote in the chat, Rainey is watching and
sure
playing
did.
with Daddy's glasses.
Aww.
Oh, hi, honey.
Wasn't there a picture of her that you put on Facebook, whether it was like a year or something ago, where she's wearing his glasses or something,
yes.
like reading a book or something?
Yes.
I thought of that picture the other day, and I'm like, oh my god, that's like the funniest picture.
Yes. And Mike also wanted me to remind everyone that not just that I won an award, but I was at a conference in Buffalo.
Oh, was that where?
It was in Buffalo that year. It was at the Association of Collegiate Schools of Planning, the ACSP conference. It was the Judge's Choice Award.
Cool.
Yeah? Very cool. I know, the future is so bright, you gotta wear shades. It's funny because I've thought about like all the cool things I could do, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think I just need to start write one post at a time and go from there.
I think that's how Gribble Nation got off the ground.
Yeah.
Originally, it was kind of, I think if you asked Doug and Adam about the history of that site, that's probably the story that they would tell you, is that it just started as this thing where we were writing, and then it gradually, one post at a time, and then after a while it snowballed into this thing that they're still doing more than 20 years later.
That's right.
So yeah, I mean, if that is the direction you want to go in, just have fun with it.
Yeah.
See what happens.
Yeah.
I started this channel almost 13 years ago.
Yeah.
And I just did one upload at a time, and then 12,000 uploads later.
Yeah.
These things have a habit of snowballing, if you haven't already noticed.
Yes.
So, you just never know where they might take you.
That's right.
And I know you have a lot of things that you could talk about. Well, I know you've sampled a lot of them on the shows that we've done.
Yeah.
And so I'd be very interested to see if you ever did want to get into the writing, the blog. I don't know if you would call it blogging on that site, but
yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's currently a WordPress site.
Yeah.
I've thought about, I guess because I know Substack is like the new thing.
See, I don't even know what that is. Is that just like another?
It's a new writing platform, but you can charge people for subscriptions on there. And different writers have different things,
okay.
right? Where they make all their posts free, or they make certain posts, premium that you have to, pay a small fee for.
Mm.
But and I subscribe to some people on there, and and it's a wide range. Some people, pretty much all their good content is behind the paywall, and then other people, all of their content is free. So
yeah.
But
well, that is one thing that I'm trying to test the waters with the new Discord, is that you're right, and you made the point the other day on the server that, there are channels there, or there are servers there. I gotta get the terminology right.
I know, we gotta get with the times.
I know. I'm kind of a latecomer when it comes to Discord, but so I'm kind of learning the terminology here still. But so there are servers that are entirely paywalled, if you will, and then there are servers that are completely free for users to join and all that.
Right. I know that a couple of the servers I'm on, that's actually so interestingly, one of the servers I'm on is for a Substack newsletter community, and it's for paid subscribers. That particular person pretty much has almost all of their posts as free.
Yeah.
But if you are a paid subscriber, you get access to the Discord.
I see.
And then and that's for her name is Anne Helen Peterson. She's one of my favorite writers. Another Discord I'm a part of is for Diamond X Studios, Sean Fay Wolf. He's a pop song reviewer and fantastic. And his Discord, so he has a Patreon.
See, that's one thing I still don't have is a Patreon.
Right. Now, in particular, because of the nature of his reviews, because he does pop songs, he can't charge for advertising for copyright reasons.
Okay.
So 100% of the money he makes on for his videos is through his Patreon. And so that's one of the tier benefits I forget how much it is per month to get on the Discord. If you are a subscriber for maybe $5,
mm-hmm.
Or if it's, I don't know if it's $5 per month or $5 per video. But
it can vary.
It can vary.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But something like that. But it's, but yeah. I know, there's the Patreon model of doing things. There's, what's the other one? Where it's Buy Me a Coffee, I think is literally what the site is called.
Is that what it is? Really?
Right. Well, the idea is basically like, hey, I don't really want to charge a subscription model, but if people like what I'm doing, they can donate money. And here's an avenue they can do that. So that's the route for people that are much more on the open source end of things, right? Like, oh, I just love doing this out of the kindness of my heart, but it is a lot of labor. So if you wanted to buy me a cup of coffee, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different things. I'm just learning all this stuff too. I know. See, now that I'm a mom, I'm really uncool.
I know, and you're having to play catch up because you're just taking care of little ding dong all the time.
I am.
I
know.
I don't got time for all this nonsense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really wasn't paying any attention to this stuff either until very recently. So it's too much. I can only take so much of it at once.
I know. I'm with you on that.
Yeah. So yeah, why don't I just create more nonsense for people to follow, I did my first test streams on Twitch this week. And definitely I have to work on my audio settings. But if you saw the test stream, and one of them is archived on the page if you're interested in checking it out, you kind of have the model for what I'm going to be doing. Spoiler alert, it's related to old video games.
Ooh.
And some other things as well. That one might be involved,
yes!
It's games from my childhood, and it's also some other stuff as well that's in the pipeline that I'm working on getting booted up as we speak. Yeah, so it's going to be mostly non-road related stuff over on Twitch, so fair warning. But I think that it gives you guys an opportunity to see another side of me that you don't really get to see.
Yeah.
Because with the channel and with the Facebook page, I'm kind of, penned into a certain, scope of work every time. You're like, I'm here to talk about roads, and I'm not here to talk about any other nonsense. Well, and on Twitch, I can talk about all that nonsense that I really wouldn't want to bring up here. So, that's kind of the motivation behind starting the Twitch channel. And so we'll see if we can sort of get some traction over there in the coming weeks or so.
Yeah, so looking in the chat, Just want to throw out there, speaking of Mike and his glasses, sticky fingers all over them now.
Oh, of course.
Of course. Mark Moore has been uncool for almost 31 years. Mark, I'm with you, because I'm definitely uncool. You want to know what my favorite...
I'm going on 35 almost.
You want to know what my favorite video game of, all time is?
Which one?
Oregon Trail 2.
Oregon Trail 2?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Not the original?
Not the original.
Well, that's interesting.
So Oregon Trail 2 is the Windows 95 version. And that game is a lot more in depth with, storyline and technology, and you can do more than just the Oregon Trail. You can do some of the other ones, like the Mormon Trail and Santa Fe, and it's
Interstate 80. No.
but it takes you 2 hours to play each time. You need a good dedicated block of time.
Really?
To go from start to finish. But it's just they did such a great job with world building in that game, and you're able to explore a lot of the different sites. You could do it in different time periods depending on what year you pick.
Right.
Yeah, nerd over here is Oregon Trail 2 for life. I still have the CD-ROM.
Do you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Man, that game, I learned so much history from that game.
Yeah, it kind of was the double feature there, because it's, transportation related, right?
Yep.
And it's also, historically, it's a recreation of historical events, which, if you're into history and all that stuff, is really interesting, too, so.
Yeah, if there's anything anybody's learned on this channel, those are, my two things.
Well... Yeah, same here, pretty much, yeah. So,
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And yes, Mike, you read my mind. We have a Morse Mill Road right around the corner from our house. Yes, we do. I thought the exact same thing when I saw that. I was like, hey, look at that.
Yeah.
And Mark commented, Morse Mill Road's an interesting road name. Yeah. Yes, it is.
So we saw the downtown connector northbound. I'll show you a southbound video before we wrap up shop here. As we pass Georgia Tech on the right, and then the road turns sharply to the left if you're going south at Peachtree. And I don't know if you caught this on the northbound video, but the MARTA station is above ground as it crosses the highway, and it's below ground as it goes, beneath the street grid there. It's an interesting way that they kind of shoved that rail line in there. But you'll see, the station is technically below grade, but it's got windows on the side because it's, it's above the highway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of neat.
Life is a highway. I'm gonna ride it all night long.
Hey, be careful with that singing, or I might get flagged for copyright.
Oh, crap.
If you do too good of a job.
Oh, well, thank you. I just kind of did that on a whim. Wasn't warmed up or anything.
Well.
Speaking of Oregon Trail 2, I have, the background music in my mind still.
There's the MARTA station there. Sounds like it's got a catchy theme to it.
Oh, it does.
Yeah.
I grew up. My brother had an NES. My cousin Greg had the Super Nintendo. My cousin Brian had all the Segas. My cousins Brian and David, they had Sega Genesis, Saturn, Dreamcast.
Yeah.
And then I got the N64, and then the PlayStation and PlayStation 2. And then my brother got the Wii, and so we all just kind of alternated, different family members got different systems,
Sure,
so that we could all go to each other's houses and play together.
Yeah, I was not much of a Sega person myself. I was SNES and N64 mainly.
Cool.
But the N64 was a huge breakthrough.
Wow. It's funny. Oh, like kids these days playing on their tablets. I have core memories of playing the Fisher-Price game on the NES at 3 years old. There was
Really?
like a Fisher-Price game with like letters and numbers.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's cool.
It's very cool. In fact, I should go pick that up on eBay.
Oh, I'm sure you can
I bet Rainey-
find all that stuff on eBay.
Oh yeah, I bet Rainey'd be really into it.
Well, nowadays you can just, kind of like what I'm doing for the Twitch channel. I have a new desktop computer that I've bought for gaming purposes.
Yes.
And so I've spent a lot of the last few days downloading, emulators and zip files and all that stuff so that I can recreate these games on my computer screen. And then you can basically find an emulator in a folder for every single game that's ever been released at this point.
Yes.
Yeah, so it would not surprise me if that's out there to be played on computer also.
Nice. I love how everybody in the chat is talking about their favorite systems, favorite games. That makes me so happy.
Go-to N64 games for me were Mario Kart, Super Smash Brothers, the original.
Yes.
And still, I would argue the best. It's gotten a little bit more. It's as it's expanded over the years, it's kind of lost some of its charm. Nothing beats the original, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh man, I used to play the original in like elementary and middle school. Used to play on my friend's GameCube in high school and in college, undergrad. So much fun. I think that one's Super Smash Brothers Melee.
Okay, yeah,
the GameCube one.
Yep. And the other N64 classic that really led to the breakup of friendships, not mine, but other people's, the original Mario Party.
Oh yes, yes.
Yep. Oh boy.
Oh yes.
Yeah, many a friendship probably ended with that game. If you know the format of that game and you understand it, you kind of know what I mean. But yeah.
My favorite N64 games, Banjo-Kazooie.
You're a banjo nerd.
I loved Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie when that eventually came out. Oh my god.
Okay.
I played those games forever. Quest 64 on N64 was my breakthrough into the RPG world, as weird as that sounds.
Okay.
That turned me on to RPGs. And, I moved from that over to all the Final Fantasies over on PlayStation and PlayStation 2. And, oh man. What are some of my other games I really liked? GoldenEye was always a fun multiplayer.
Yeah, that's a classic one.
Oh,
yeah.
What other N64 games? Oh gosh, I know. The Zelda games. Oh my god.
Yeah, I wasn't into Zelda myself.
You weren't?
No, I wasn't a Zelda guy.
Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, both amazing. Both so amazing. Oh my gosh, loved both of those games so much. Yeah. On Super NES, my favorite were the Donkey Kong Country games.
Yeah, those.
Oh my god.
It was hard to beat those.
Yes, it was.
And I actually did find programs for those to play those on my computer, so I think you'll be seeing those at some point in the near future.
Oh yes.
Yep.
My grandfather used to lovingly call that the monkey game.
That's what my brother called it when he was, because they came out in the mid '90s, and he was born in the mid '90s.
But yeah, we would. My cousin would bring over his Super NES, and we'd set it up on my grandparents' TV, and my grandfather would be like, "Are you playing the monkey game?"
That's right. Yep.
Yep.
I think the first video game that I have vivid memories of playing was the SNES Super Mario World.
Ooh, that's a good one.
That was kind of like my entry into the video game realm. And that's not a bad one to start out on.
It's not.
Yeah.
I remember, like I said, my brother's 4.5 years older than me. So he had the NES. Like I said, I was born in 87, he was born in 82. So I would have been about, 1990 was my earliest memories. Like I said, that Fisher Price like numbers and letters game. Loved that game. I loved all the the original Super Mario 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, all three of those are great.
Oh my gosh, yes. Grew up on those. Some other games I loved. I had played the Little Mermaid game to death. There was a Tom and Jerry game that was so much fun.
I wasn't aware of those two, but okay.
So good. And what is? Oh my gosh, I never remember the name of it. I have to Google it real fast. I used to play this game with my dad all the time. It was this baseball game. That's kind of an obscure one. I have to find what it's called. I absolutely love playing with him. Baseball Stars 2. Yeah.
And that was on what platform was
NES.
that? It was on NES, okay.
You know what game I loved playing, because my brother also had a Game Gear. I had the game. I got the Game Boys. He got the Game Gear.
Uh-huh.
I had, the original Game Boy. I had a Game Boy Color. Loved the Pokemon games. Oh my god.
Of course, yeah.
Of course.
Those originally came out for our generation, right?
Yeah.
We were the first, kids to experience that phenomenon.
Oh yeah.
That continues to this day, right?
Oh yes.
Yep.
I know, it's really cool.
Well, we've talked an awful lot about video games.
We have! Oh my god, and again, I love what everybody's talking about in the chat. Oh, it makes me so happy. Yes. Yes. Trainer Red Mario, you would love the new Zelda games. Yes. Oh yeah, the Clefairy game on Pokemon Stadium. I loved that on N64. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another N64 one that a lot of my friends played a lot, but I never really got into that one. But yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've talked a lot about
video games,
and I hope you've been enjoying the backdrop of all this discussion with the tour of the Atlanta Freeway system. We've been kind of going through some footage of the major interstates in town, and obviously I showed you a video of the I-75 toller coaster lanes in there as well. Yes. So I think we are gonna kind of wrap it up here, because I'm hungry and I gotta have dinner. And I got a football game to watch later.
Oh yes! Oh my gosh, yes!
What is it? Kickoff's in 20 minutes, so I gotta run here in a couple of minutes. But we really want to thank Laura for being my co-panelist tonight, kind of walking everybody through the history of Atlanta, its freeways, and also, of course, we talked about the MARTA system, which is an interesting side discussion to have as well. And we want to thank all of you who joined us live in the chat. It's always good to have you guys with us. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and thank you for watching, and we look forward to having you on next time. We'll be right back here next week with another exciting episode.
Yay!
Yay! Well, when aren't they exciting, right?
I know.
So that's going to do it for us.
Yep, thanks everybody. I love Bob Mom's comment. Great talk about Atlanta video games. roads.
We gotta mix in some other side topics.
You know what? We had some heavy discussion the first 2 hours, so I think we needed to end on a lighter note.
I think we did pretty well.
Yeah.
End on a positive note. That's what I say.
Yeah.
All right, we're out of here.
Yeah.
Have a good one, everybody.
Yeah.
Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Yes, thank you. You too.
See you next time.
See y'all.